Victor Rahman dragged the wounded American out of the rocks by his collar, held him up so all 7 trapped SEALs could see, and drove his boot into the man's ribs until something cracked. "Watch," he screamed at the mountains. "Watch what your country sends to die." He fired a round into the dirt beside the soldier's head, laughing, daring them to move. 7 operators, bleeding and surrounded, could only watch. And far above them, one young woman that every man had written off was already lifting a rifle in a hand that would not stop shaking. Her commander's voice broke over the radio. "If you miss, we die." Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask you something simple. If you believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when everyone has counted them out, then take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the very end, because it only gets more intense from here. And do me one small favor. Leave a comment and tell me the name of the city you are watching from tonight, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months before that mountain, before the blood and the wind and the impossible shot, Emily Carter was sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, staring down at her own right hand like it belonged to a stranger. The doctor was still talking. She could see his mouth moving. She could hear the words, but somehow they were not landing. They floated past her ears like they were meant for some other woman in some other room. "Captain Carter," he said again gently, "are you hearing me?" "I hear you," she said. Her voice was flat and quiet. "I just don't accept it." The doctor sat down on the little rolling stool and folded his hands. He was a good man, she could tell. He was not enjoying this. But he had learned a long time ago that a soldier deserved the truth even when the truth was a knife. "The nerve damage in your hand is real," he said. "The tremor is not going to fully go away. You may regain most function for daily life. You might carry a coffee cup, drive a car, tie your shoes. But precision work, fine motor control under stress, holding a rifle perfectly still at 800 meters while your heart is pounding." He shook his head slowly. "Emily, I'm sorry. That part of your career is over." For a long moment, she did not say anything at all. Outside the window, somewhere on the base, a formation was jogging by, chanting a cadence she had heard 1,000 times in her life. She had grown up on cadences like that. She had learned to walk on gravel roads that led to firing ranges. Her father had put a rifle in her hands before she was old enough to ride a bicycle. "Do you know who my father was?" she said. The doctor blinked. "I read the file." "Then you know he made the shot at Kandahar that saved 11 men, Emily said. "You know he did it with a bullet in his shoulder. You know he did it when every so-called expert in the world said it could not be done." She finally looked up, and her eyes were wet, but they were not soft. They were burning. "So forgive me, doctor, if I don't take the word over is over." The doctor was quiet. Then he said something she did not expect. "Your father also knew when a body had reached its limit," he said gently. "That's part of the job, too, Emily, knowing the difference between courage and denial. I'd hate to see a fine soldier destroy what's left of her hand, chasing a version of herself that the injury already took." That one hit her. She felt it in her chest like a fist. She looked down at her hand again. She tried to hold it perfectly still, flat in the air in front of her, the way she had held it 10,000 times, and there it was. The tremble, small, almost invisible. But it was there, and she knew the way a shooter always knows that at long range, a tremble that small becomes a miss that big. "Get out," she said quietly. "Emily." "Please," she said. "I'm not angry at you. I just need you to get out of this room so I can fall apart without an audience." He stood. He put a hand briefly on her shoulder, and to his credit, he did not say anything else. He just left, and the door closed with a soft click, and Emily Carter, 26 years old, daughter of a legend, was finally alone. And she did fall apart. For exactly 11 minutes, she let herself cry. She cried for the career she thought was gone. She cried for the men she would never cover from a ridgeline. She cried most of all for her father, because she had promised him something once on the worst night of her life, and now she was terrified she would never be able to keep it. Then after 11 minutes, she wiped her face with her good hand, stood up, and made herself a promise of her own. "Not yet," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm not finished yet." She did not know it, but 200 miles away, a man was reading her file for the 3rd time and thinking almost the exact same thing. His name was Commander Daniel Hayes. Hayes was 44 years old and looked closer to 54 in the way that men who have carried other men's coffins tend to age. He had spent 22 years in the teams. He had a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that had seen too much and a quiet way of speaking that made loud men nervous. And right now, he was sitting in a cramped office at a training facility on the coast, staring at a photograph clipped to the inside of Emily Carter's personnel folder. It was not a photo of Emily. It was a photo of a man, an older man in dusty fatigues, kneeling in the dirt with a rifle across his knees and a grin on his sunburned face. Written on the back in faded pen were 3 words: "Never quit, brother." "Marcus Carter," Hayes murmured to himself. "You son of a gun. You never told me you had a daughter who shoots." Because Hayes had known him. Years ago, in a different war, in a different life, Marcus Carter had pulled a young and stupid Daniel Hayes out of a kill zone and taken a shrapnel doing it, and never once let Hayes buy him a drink to say thank you. Marcus Carter had been the finest rifleman Hayes ever stood beside, and Marcus Carter had died 3 years ago on a mountain, not so different from the ones in the news making a shot that saved a squad he had never even met. And now here was his daughter, a sniper, wounded, being quietly pushed out the door by a medical board. Hayes closed the folder. He sat there for a long time in the dim office. Then he picked up the phone. The man on the other end was a 2-star general named Boyd, and Boyd was not happy to be called after 9 at night. "This better be good, Daniel. I want to bring a candidate into the sniper evaluation program," Hayes said, "for the new integrated element. We've got 24 candidates. We're full. Make it 25. There was a pause on the line. "Who?" "Captain Emily Carter." Another pause, longer this time. "The one with the hand," Boyd said flatly. "Daniel, that's a medical hold. That's a woman the board is trying to retire. You want to walk her into the most brutal sniper course we run in front of 24 guys who will eat her alive on a busted hand?" "Yes," Hayes said. "That's exactly what I want." "Give me one reason." Hayes looked at the photograph on his desk at the grinning man in the dust. "Never quit, brother, because I owe her father my life," he said. "And because if she's half of what he was, she'll do more with a broken hand than most of your candidates will do with 2 good ones. Let her try, sir. If she washes out, she washes out. But let her try." The general sighed. It was the sigh of a man who has learned that Daniel Hayes does not ask for things twice. "If she embarrasses this program," Boyd said, "it's on you." "Everything's always on me, sir," Hayes said. "Send the orders." And that was how 3 weeks later, on a gray, cold morning, with the ocean roaring behind a line of barracks, Emily Carter stepped off a bus and walked into the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. She felt the eyes before she even had her bag off her shoulder. 24 men, standing in loose formation on the grinder, waiting for the newest arrival, and the moment they saw her, something shifted in the air. It was not hatred exactly. It was worse. It was dismissal. It was 24 elite operators looking at a woman with a taped wrist and thinking without saying a word, she will not last a week. One of them said it out loud. He was tall and broad and handsome in a hard way, with a jaw full of stubble and the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been proven wrong. His name, she would learn soon enough, was Jake Sullivan, and he did not bother to lower his voice. "You've got to be kidding me," Sullivan said to the man next to him. "They sent us a diversity project." A couple of the men laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Emily stopped walking. She turned her head and looked directly at him. She did not glare. She did not snap. She just looked at him calmly for a long 3 seconds, the way you look at a target before you decide whether he is worth a round. "What's your name?" she said. Sullivan smirked. "Sullivan? Why are you going to write me up?" "No," Emily said. "I just like to know the names of the people who apologize to me later." The laughter changed. Now some of them were laughing at Sullivan, and his smirk tightened just a little, and Emily walked past him without another word and set her bag down in the barracks and started making her bunk. But inside her heart was hammering, because she knew what this was. She had 24 men to convince, one commander watching, and a hand that shook when she was tired. She had walked into a room full of people who had already decided her story, and she had exactly one way to rewrite it. She would have to outwork every single one of them. That night, when the barracks finally went dark and the breathing all around her slowed into sleep, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling, and she did something she had done every night for 3 years. She talked to her father. "They don't want me here, Dad," she whispered, so quiet no one could hear. "The doctors say I'm done. The men think I'm a joke. And my hand." She lifted it in the darkness and watched the faint tremble against the gray light from the window. My hand won't stay still. And in her memory, clear as a bell, she heard him answer the way he used to answer when she was a little girl who missed a shot and threw down her rifle in tears. The rifle doesn't care how you feel, Em. It only cares what you do. You can't control the wind. You can't control the doubt. You can only control the next breath in the next round. So stop crying about the shot you missed and get ready for the shot you're about to make. Emily closed her eyes. Okay, Dad, she whispered. Next breath. Next round. The first week nearly broke her. Not the shooting. The shooting was still weeks away. The first week was everything else. The runs on the beach with logs on their shoulders. The endless hours in freezing surf. The obstacle courses that tore the skin off her palms. The sleep deprivation that made the whole world tilt and blur. And through all of it, the instructors watched her hand. She saw them watching. Every time there was fine work to do, tying a knot under a time limit, assembling a weapon blindfolded, threading a line through a carabiner. With numb fingers, she felt their eyes drop to her right hand, waiting for the tremble, waiting for the fumble, waiting for the moment they could write the word she dreaded most on a clipboard. Unsatisfactory. So Emily did something clever, something her father had taught her without ever meaning to. She trained her left hand. At night, when the others slept, she practiced. Tying knots left-handed, loading magazines left-handed, building the muscle memory in the hand that did not shake so that when the pressure came and her right hand betrayed her, her left could carry the load. It was not in any manual. It was not how it was supposed to be done. But Emily Carter had learned a long time ago that the rules were written for people who had not been told their career was over. By the end of the second week, one of the instructors, a grizzled senior chief named Boone, noticed something. He was watching the class assemble weapons under time. He was watching Emily waiting as always for the tremble. And what he saw instead was a woman who had quietly rebuilt her entire technique around her weakness, feeding parts with her steady left hand, stabilizing with her damaged right, working around the injury so smoothly that if you did not know it was there, you would never have seen it. Boone did not say anything to her, but that night he found Commander Hayes in the chow hall. The Carter girl, Boone said. Hayes looked up from his coffee. What about her? She should have quit by now, Boone said. Everything stacked against her. The hand, the men, the pace. He shook his head slowly. But she's not quitting, and she's not just surviving either. She's adapting. I've been doing this 19 years, Commander. I know grit when I see it. That girl's got something. Hayes allowed himself a small, tired smile. Yeah, he said, she comes by it honest. But not everyone was watching Emily with respect. Jake Sullivan was watching her too, and what he felt, if he had been honest enough to name it, was fear. Because Sullivan had come into this program the golden boy, top of every list, the one the instructors pointed to as the standard. And every day that Emily Carter did not wash out, every day she matched him stride for stride on the beach and knot for knot on the ropes. A small, cold voice in the back of his mind whispered a question he did not want to hear. What if she's better than you? So Sullivan did what small men do when they feel threatened. He tried to break her. It started small. A shove in the chow line disguised as an accident. A whispered comment during formation. Her gear moved just enough to cost her time on an inspection. Emily said nothing. She fixed her gear. She held her ground in line. She let the comments slide off her like water off a rifle barrel. But then one morning it went too far. They were doing a partner exercise, dragging a 200-pound dummy across the sand under fire, simulating a wounded man being pulled to safety. Sullivan was paired with Emily, and halfway through the drag, at the worst possible moment, when her arms were screaming and her damaged hand had gone half numb, Sullivan let go of his side. Just for a second. Just long enough that the full weight slammed onto Emily and her bad hand buckled, and she went down face first into the sand with 200 pounds of dead weight on top of her, and the whole class saw it, and Sullivan stood there and shook his head like she had failed. Told you, Sullivan said loud enough for the instructors to hear. Can't carry the load. Emily lay there in the sand for a moment, pinned, breathing hard, her ruined hand throbbing. And something inside her went very cold and very quiet. She got up. She did not yell. She did not accuse him. She wiped the sand from her face, grabbed the dummy, again positioned her body, and looked Sullivan dead in the eye. Let go again, she said in a voice so calm it was frightening. And I'll drag this dummy and you across the whole beach. Now pick up your side. For one long second, nobody moved. Then to everyone's surprise, Sullivan picked up his side, and they finished the drag. And when it was done, Emily walked away without another word, and the men who had watched exchanged looks because something had shifted. Just a little. The dismissal in their eyes had cracked, and through the crack, for the first time, a sliver of something else was showing. Respect. That night, Commander Hayes called Emily into his office. She stood at attention in front of his desk, sand still in her hair, her bad hand wrapped and swollen. Hayes looked at her for a long time before he spoke. Sullivan let go of that dummy, he said. On purpose. Yeah. It was not a question. Emily kept her eyes forward. I couldn't say, sir. Don't do that, Hayes said quietly. Don't cover for a man who tried to hurt you. That's not loyalty. That's fear, and I know you're not afraid of him. Emily's jaw tightened. If I report him, sir, then to every man in that barracks, I'm the woman who couldn't take it and ran to the commander. And I'd rather earn their respect with my rifle than lose it with a complaint. She finally met his eyes. I'll handle Sullivan my own way, on the range. Permission to speak freely. Granted. You didn't bring me here to be protected, Emily said. You brought me here to prove something. So let me prove it. Hayes leaned back in his chair and studied her, and for just a moment, in the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, he saw a ghost. He saw Marcus Carter kneeling in the dust with a grin, saying the exact same thing 30 years ago. I knew your father, Hayes said. Emily went very still. He pulled me out of a kill zone in a war you were too young to remember. Hayes went on quietly. Took shrapnel doing it. Never let me thank him. He was the best rifleman I ever stood next to, and he was a better man than he ever got credit for. Hayes paused. That's why you're here, Emily. Not politics, not diversity, not any of the garbage Sullivan whispers. You're here because I owed your father a debt and because I had a feeling his daughter might be worth the trouble. He leaned forward. Don't make me wrong. Emily's throat was tight. For 3 years, she had carried her father's memory like a stone in her chest. And now here was a man who had known him, who had bled beside him, telling her she belonged. I won't, sir, she said, and her voice only shook a little. Good, Hayes said, because in 2 weeks we go live. Real rifles, real distances, and I promise you, Captain, that's where the men will decide once and for all whether you're a warrior or a mistake. He picked up a pen and looked back down at his desk. Dismissed. She turned to go. She had her hand on the door. Emily, Hayes said. She stopped. Your father used to say something before every shot, Hayes said, not looking up. You ever hear it? Emily nodded slowly. Next breath, she whispered. Next round. Hayes smiled just barely. Get some rest, Captain. You're going to need it. The next 2 weeks were a different kind of hell. Now it was about the rifle, and here at last Emily was on ground she understood. But her hand did not care that she understood. The first time she settled behind a scope at 600 meters, with the whole class lined up and watching, and Sullivan smirking 3 positions down her damaged hand, betrayed her at the worst moment. The tremble crept in, the crosshairs danced, and her first 3 shots went wide. She heard Sullivan laugh under his breath. Told you, he murmured. All talk. Emily lay there behind the rifle with her heart pounding and her father's voice in her head, and she made a decision. She stopped fighting the tremble. Fighting it only made it worse. Instead, she did what she had trained herself to do in the dark night after night. She let her steady left hand carry the load. She rebuilt her whole position around the hand that worked. She slowed her breathing until her heartbeat was a distant drum. And on the very edge of an exhale in the still pause between 2 heartbeats in the tiny window, where even a damaged hand goes quiet, she squeezed. The round struck dead center. She did it again. Dead center, and again, and again. The laughing stopped. By the end of that first live fire day, Captain Emily Carter had the 2nd highest score in the class. And the man in first place by a margin so thin it was almost cruel was Jake Sullivan, who was no longer smirking at all. That night in the barracks, for the first time, a couple of the men actually talked to her. Not much. A nod. A quiet good shooting today. But to Emily, it was everything because she knew how much it cost these men to say it and she knew what it meant that they had said it at all. But Sullivan was not among them. Sullivan lay in his bunk in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the others give her that quiet respect, and the cold fear in his gut had grown into something uglier. Because he had felt it out there on the range today, that razor-thin margin. He had barely held first place. And a voice inside him, the honest voice he had been running from his whole life, whispered the truth he could not stand to hear. She's better than you. She's shooting like that with a broken hand. And when the pressure is real, when it counts, she's going to leave you in the dust. Sullivan turned over in his bunk and shut his eyes and told himself it was not true. He told himself she had gotten lucky. He told himself the range was one thing and the real world was another. He had no idea how right he was about that last part, and he had no idea how badly he was about to learn it. Because 2 weeks later, the training ended, and the phone in Commander Hayes' office rang at 3 a.m. Hayes answered on the second ring the way men in his line of work always do, instantly awake. He listened for 90 seconds. He did not say a word, and when he hung up, his hand was steady, but his face had gone gray. Within the hour, the entire class was assembled in the briefing room, half-dressed, silent, sensing that something enormous had shifted. Hayes stood at the front. Behind him on the screen was a face, a man in his 50s with a cruel mouth and eyes like two black stones. This, Hayes said, is Victor Rahman. The name meant nothing to most of them yet. It would come to mean everything. Rahman is a warlord operating in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. Hayes went on, his voice flat and hard. He is responsible for hundreds of deaths, aid workers, civilians, 2 special forces teams in the last 18 months. He is intelligent, he is patient, and he does not fear us because so far we have never once gotten close enough to touch him. Hayes clicked to the next slide. A satellite image, a cluster of buildings tucked into a brutal fold of mountains. 11 hours ago, Hayes said, a SEAL element went into those mountains on a high-value target mission. Their objective was Rahman. Their plan was sound. Their intelligence was good. He paused, and the room was so silent you could hear the ocean through the walls. It was a trap. Nobody breathed. Rahman knew they were coming, Hayes said. He let them come. And right now, as I stand here, 7 American operators are pinned down in those rocks, surrounded, cut off with wounded men and dwindling ammunition. And the only way out is a valley that Rahman's fighters have turned into a shooting gallery. His jaw flexed. The quick reaction force is grounded by weather. The nearest support is hours away. Those 7 men do not have hours. He looked out at the class, and his eyes slowly, deliberately moved down the line of stunned faces and came to rest on one. On Emily Carter. There is exactly one window, Hayes said. One narrow chance. If a sniper element can reach an overwatch position on the eastern ridge before dawn, they can cover the extraction and give those 7 men a corridor to escape. He let that hang. It is a brutal insert. It is a shot at extreme distance in unpredictable mountain wind, and it will be made by the best rifle this program has produced. His eyes did not leave Emily. I need a shooter, and I need them ready to fly in 40 minutes. The room erupted. Every man there wanted it. Sullivan was on his feet. Sir, I'm your top scorer, sir. It should be me. And that was when Emily Carter stood up. She did not shout. She did not push. She simply rose to her feet in the middle of that cave, and something in the quiet certainty of her made the whole room go still. Sir, she said, the eastern ridge. What's the wind pattern there? Hayes almost smiled, because it was the exact right question. Not who deserves it, not pick me, but the one thing that actually mattered. Swirling, Hayes said, worst in the country. The valley funnels 3 separate currents. Every shooter we've ever sent there has struggled with it. Then you don't want your top scorer, sir, Emily said quietly. You want your best wind reader. She lifted her right hand to the damaged one and held it out flat in front of the whole class. This hand shakes. Everyone in this room knows it. But I have swinged every night for months learning to shoot through it. And I have spent my whole life learning to read wind that no one else could read because my father taught me on a mountain not so different from that one. Her voice did not waver. Send me, sir. I'll bring your 7 men home. The room was silent, and every eye was on her. And this time in every one of those eyes, even in the Sullivans, there was no more dismissal. There was only the question that had followed her from the hospital bed to this room. Could she actually do it? Hayes looked at her for a long moment. He thought of a grinning man in the dust. Never quit, brother. He thought of a debt 3 decades old, and he made his decision. Carter, he said, you're my primary shooter. Sullivan's face fell. Sir. Sullivan, Hayes cut in. You're her spotter. If he had slapped him, Sullivan could not have looked more stunned. Her spotter, sir, me I don't. He stopped himself, but the meaning was clear. I don't answer to her. Hayes crossed the room in 4 steps and got very close to Sullivan and spoke in a voice only the front row could hear. Let me tell you exactly what's about to happen, son, Tom, Hayes said quietly. You are going to get on that helicopter. You are going to lie down next to that woman on a freezing ridge. And when the moment comes, 7 American lives are going to depend on the 2 of you working as one. So you are going to swallow whatever poison you have been carrying in your gut, and you are going to spot for her, and you are going to do it perfectly. Because if those men die because you couldn't get over yourself, that is not a mistake you carry. That is a grave you dig and you sleep in it every night for the rest of your life. Hayes stepped back. Do you understand me? Sullivan swallowed hard. Yes, sir, he said hoarsely. Then move, Hayes said, and his voice cracked across the whole room like a rifle shot. Wheels up in 35 minutes. Let's go save some lives. The room exploded into motion, and in the middle of it all, Emily Carter stood for 1 heartbeat perfectly still and closed her eyes and did the only thing she knew how to do when the world was about to demand everything she had. She talked to her father. 6 months ago, they told me I was finished, she thought. 6 months ago, I couldn't hold a rifle steady in an empty room, and now 7 men are going to live or die by my hand. In her memory, she heard him, clear as a bell, warm as a summer afternoon on the range. Next breath, Em, next round. That's all it ever is. You can't save them all at once. You can only make the next shot. So stop thinking about the 7 and start thinking about the wind. Emily opened her eyes. She looked down at her damaged hand one last time. It trembled faint as a candle flame. She had spent 6 months hating that tremble, hating what it took from her Yvonne. But now, standing on the edge of the impossible, she looked at it and felt something she had not expected. She felt ready. Okay, Dad, she whispered so quiet no one heard. Next breath, next round. Then she grabbed her rifle and she walked out into the dark toward a helicopter and toward a mountain and toward a warlord who had promised the whole world that no woman would ever save those men. He was about to find out just how wrong a man could be. And 40 minutes later, as the helicopter clawed its way up into the Black Mountains with 7 lives in the balance in a swirling wind waiting on the ridge, Jake Sullivan lay beside Emily Carter in the cramped and shaking dark, staring at the woman he had spent weeks trying to break, and he leaned over and he said the last thing anyone expected him to say. Carter, she looked at him. I let go of that dummy on purpose, Sullivan said, his voice low under the roar of the rotors. On the beach, I let go on purpose. And I've been carrying it, and I'm carrying it up this mountain, and I can't. He shook his head. 7 men. I can't have that in my head when it counts. So I'm telling you, I was wrong about you. Dead wrong, and in about an hour I'm going to be lying next to the best shot I've ever seen, calling win for her, praying to God she's as good as I'm scared she is. He swallowed. I'm sorry, Emily, for all of it. For a long moment, Emily just looked at him. Then she reached out with her steady left hand and gripped his forearm hard the way soldiers do. Apology accepted, she said. Now stop talking about the past and start thinking about that wind, because I'm going to need every bit of you when we get up there. She almost smiled. We bring all 7 home, Sullivan. Both of us. Together. You hear me? Sullivan nodded, and for the first time in weeks, the fear in his gut turned into something else. Something clean. Something like hope. All 7, he said. Together. The helicopter climbed higher into the freezing dark toward the ridge, toward the wind, toward the moment that everyone in that story had been racing toward from the very beginning. 7 men were bleeding in the rocks. A warlord was waiting with a cruel smile and a promise. And a young woman that the whole world had counted out was about to lie down behind a rifle lift, a hand that trembled like a candle flame and prove once and for all exactly what she was made of. Below them in the rocks, Commander Hayes' voice crackled over the radio, thin and desperate. Through the static, saying the words that had started it all, the words that carried 7 lives, the words no shooter ever wants to hear. Carter, when you're set, understand me. There is no second chance up here. And Emily Carter, gripping her rifle in the shaking dark, looked out at the black mountains, where her whole life had been leading her, and answered him in a voice as steady and calm as still water. "Copy," she said. "I only need one." The helicopter hit a wall of mountain wind and dropped 40 feet in less than a second, and every man inside grabbed for something. Emily Carter did not. She kept both hands wrapped around her rifle case, holding it to her chest like a mother holds a child, and she stared straight ahead into the black. "You always this calm before a jump," Sullivan shouted over the rotors. "No," Emily said. "I'm terrified. I just don't let my hands know it." The crew chief held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes to the insert point. Below them, somewhere in that ocean of darkness, 7 Americans were counting the seconds, and a warlord named Victor Rahman was counting their bodies before they were even dead. Commander Hayes' voice cut through the radio, again thin and stretched. "Overwatch element, this is ground. What's your status?" 2 minutes out," Sullivan answered. "We'll be on the eastern ridge before 0500. There was a pause. Then Hayes said something that made Sullivan's stomach drop. "Make it faster. We just lost Delgado." Emily's head turned. "Lost him how?" "Wounded," Hayes said, and his voice was flat in the way a man's voice goes flat when he is holding himself together with both hands. "Took a round low. He's alive. But he's not walking out of here. And Rahman's people are working closer. They know we're pinned. They're being patient." A crackle. "They're not in a hurry to kill us. They want us to watch each other die first. That's who this man is." Sullivan looked at Emily in the dark. He did not say anything. He did not have to. They both understood now in a way the briefing room could never have made them understand exactly what was waiting for them on that mountain. "Copy," Emily said into the radio. Her voice did not shake. "We're coming. Hold on." The helicopter flared hard, the nose pitching up, and the crew chief was screaming and shoving them toward the open door. And then there was no more talking, no more waiting, no more time. There was only the leap into the freezing dark and the mountain rushing up to meet them. They came down hard on a slope of loose shale 100 meters below the ridgeline, and Emily's damaged hand took the impact wrong. And for one white-hot instant, the pain was so bad she nearly cried out. She swallowed it. She got up. She checked her rifle case first, and her body second, the way her father had taught her, because a shooter who saves herself and loses her weapon has saved nothing at all. "You good?" Sullivan hissed, crouched beside her. "I'm good." "Your hand." "I said I'm good, Sullivan." She flexed the fingers once, twice, forcing the feeling back into them. "Move, the clock's the enemy now." The climb to the ridge should have taken 20 minutes. It took them 9. 9 minutes of hauling 40 pounds of gear up a slope in the dark, of fingers bleeding on frozen rock, of lungs burning in the thin air, of 2 people who 3 weeks ago had been enemies, now moving as one because there was no other choice. Sullivan led, Emily followed, and every few feet when the shale threatened to slide out from under them and send them both tumbling into the black, one of them would reach back without a word and steady the other, and they would keep climbing. It was 0447 when they crested the ridge, and what Emily saw through her scope stopped her heart. The valley opened up below them, and even in the gray gloom before dawn, she could read the whole terrible story of it in a single glance. She saw the tight cluster of rocks where the seals were pinned, a jumble of boulders no bigger than a 2-car garage, and she saw the muzzle flashes winking around it in a slow, lazy, patient ring. She counted the enemy positions the way her father had taught her, left to right, 1 through however many, and her stomach turned over. "Sullivan," she whispered, "get on the glass. Tell me what you see." Sullivan settled beside her, pressed his eye to the spotting scope, and went very still. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, in a voice she had never heard him use before, he said, "God Almighty." "How many?" "I've got—" He stopped, swallowed. "I've got confirmed 25. Maybe more. They've got our guys in a ring, Emily, a full ring. There's no gap. There's no seam. Every direction those 7 try to break, there's a gun waiting." He pulled back from the scope and looked at her, and his face had gone bloodless in the gray light. "This isn't a firefight. This is an execution they haven't gotten around to finishing yet." Emily said nothing. She was already back on her own scope, breathing slow, letting the whole picture settle into her the way water settles into low ground. 25 fighters, 7 trapped men, one of them down. And between the rifle in her hands and those 7 lives, 400 meters of the worst wind in the country. "Ground, this is Overwatch," she said into the radio. We're set on the eastern ridge. I have eyes on your position and eyes on the enemy ring. The relief in Hayes' voice was almost physical. Thank God. Thank God, Carter. What do you see? I see 25 hostiles, Emily said. I see a full encirclement, and I see one very small window. She paused. Commander, I need you to be straight with me. Your men, how much ammunition do they have left? There was a silence on the line that told her everything before Hayes ever spoke. Minutes, Hayes said finally. We've got minutes of ammunition left, Carter. Maybe 10, maybe less if they push. It was 0451, 10 minutes of ammunition, and a plan that did not yet exist. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere cold and clear and calm, the place her father had taught her to go, the place where the fear could not follow. Then here's what we're going to do, she said. And beside her, Sullivan turned his head and stared at her because the voice coming out of Emily Carter now was not the voice of a candidate who had washed into their program 3 weeks ago on a busted hand. It was the voice of a commander. It was the voice of someone who had already seen the whole thing play out in her mind and was simply describing it to the rest of them as it happened. Rahman's fighters are patient, Emily said. That patience is the only thing keeping our guys alive, and it's also the thing that's going to kill them. As long as those fighters think they have all the time in the world, they'll sit in that ring and squeeze slow. So we're going to take their patience away from them. I'm going to start dropping them one at a time from a direction they can't see and can't understand. And when men start dying from a ghost they can't find, patience turns into panic. Panic breaks the ring, and a broken ring is a corridor. That corridor is the only way our guys walk out, Sullivan said slowly, understanding. That corridor is the only way anybody walks out, Emily said. So we don't miss, not once. Every shot has to land, and every shot has to land somewhere that makes the rest of them more afraid, not more organized. We don't just kill 25 men, Sullivan. We kill them in the right order. She keyed the radio. Commander, you copy all that. A beat. Then Hayes, and there was something new in his voice now, something that sounded almost like awe. I copy, Carter. You just described exactly what I'd do if I had a shooter I trusted. A pause. I've got that shooter now. Green light. Do it. And that was the moment. 0453. That was the moment Emily Carter stopped being a woman everyone doubted and started being the only thing standing between 7 Americans and the grave. Sullivan, she said. Wind. And here it came. The one thing that could not be trained, the one thing that had washed out shooter after shooter on this exact ridge, the one thing Emily had told an entire briefing room she could do better than any man alive. Sullivan read the flags of dust and grass and the drift of smoke down in the valley, and his voice tightened. It's a nightmare, Emily. I've got a left to right at the muzzle, maybe 6 miles an hour. But down in the valley, it swings. There's a current coming up off the valley floor that pushes right to left, and then near the target, he stopped. It just dies. It goes dead calm right where your rounds are landing, and then it kicks up again. 3 different winds in one flight path. I've never seen anything like it. I have, Emily said quietly. Sullivan looked at her. My father used to take me to a canyon back home, she said, not moving her eye from the scope. 3 winds, just like this. He'd make me shoot it for hours until I learned to feel the seams, not calculate them. Feel them, where one wind hands the bullet off to the next. Her damaged hand settled onto the rifle and it trembled faint as a candle flame, and she breathed it still. This mountain thinks its wind is a secret. It's not. My father gave me the answer 20 years ago. She let out a slow breath. First target, she said. Sullivan, find me the man they're all watching. Find me their leader on the line. Sullivan swept the ring. Far left, big guy, standing when everyone else is prone. He's directing. The others keep looking to him. That's the one, Emily said. When their leader falls out of nowhere, that's when the fear starts. She adjusted. Her breathing dropped. Her heartbeat slowed to a faraway drum. Give me the number. 412 meters. Hold left edge, but she's going to drift on you in the middle, so favor. Sullivan hesitated. Favor center mass and trust the dead air near the target to bring her back. Trust the dead air, Emily repeated softly. It was exactly what she would have done. You've got a good eye, Sullivan. I had a good teacher these last 3 weeks, he said. I just didn't know it till now. Emily almost smiled. Then the smile went away, and there was nothing left but the shot. She waited for the edge of an exhale. She waited for the still pause between two heartbeats, the little window where even a damaged hand goes quiet. And in that window, 412 meters away, in a valley full of the worst wind in the country, Captain Emily Carter squeezed. The rifle bucked. For one endless second, nothing. And then the big man on the far left of the ring dropped straight down like his strings had been cut and did not move again. Hit, Sullivan breathed. Clean hit. He's down. He's down and nobody knows where it came from. Down in the ring, Emily watched through her scope as the fighters closest to the fallen leader froze. She saw their heads turn. She saw the confusion ripple outward. One of them crawled to the body, checked it, and then looked up and around wildly at the sky, at the ridges, at nothing because the shot had come from nowhere, and there had been no sound they could place in the echoing valley. It was 0454, one down, 24 to go, and 9 minutes of ammunition left in the rocks below. Next, Emily said, don't let them settle. The second one has to come before they've even understood the first. On it, Sullivan was already moving the glass. Second man 3 o'clock from the leader, he's the one giving orders now. 430. Same wind, same seam, trust the dead air. Emily breathed, Emily waited, Emily squeezed. 430 meters away, the second leader pitched over sideways, and now the confusion in the ring turned into something with a sharper edge. Now the fighters were shouting to each other. Now they were pointing in 3 different directions at once, none of them the right one. 2, Sullivan said, 2 down. And Emily, they're rattled. They're breaking cover to look for you. They're standing up. Good, Emily said. A standing man is an easy man. Give me the next one. And this was where it changed. This was where the woman that a hospital board had tried to retire, that 24 operators had written off, that Jake Sullivan himself had tried to break on a beach, disappeared entirely. And in her place, there was only a machine of breath and wind and patience and steel. Third shot, hit. A fighter who had stood up to search the ridges dead before he heard the round. Fourth shot, hit. The man beside him cut down as he dove for cover because Emily had read that he would dive left and put the bullet where he was going instead of where he was. Fifth shot, hit. 5, Sullivan said, and his voice was climbing now, disbelief bleeding into something like rapture. 5 for 5, Emily, 5 for 5 in this wind. That's not possible. That's 6, Emily said. Keep your eye on the glass and stop counting my hits. Count me my targets. But down in the rocks, Commander Hayes was counting. Hayes had his own optic up, watching the ridge fire and the enemy fall, and with each shot that landed, something loosened in his chest, some knot that had been strangling him since the phone rang at 3 in the morning. He keyed his radio and his voice cracked. Carter, he said, Carter, whatever you're doing up there, don't you dare stop. You are carving us a road, you hear me? You're carving us a road out of hell. Then get your men ready to walk it, Commander, Emily said between breaths. Because when the ring breaks, it's going to break fast, and you'll have seconds, not minutes. It was 0457, and that was when the first thing went wrong. Sullivan saw it before Emily did. He saw the enemy fighters, for all their panic, start to do the one thing that could beat her. He saw them stop looking at the sky and start looking at the echo. He saw one of them, a lean, quick, clever man near the back of the ring, cock his head and trace the sound the way a hunter traces a wounded animal and point, and this time he pointed at the right ridge. Emily, Sullivan said sharply, we're made. That one back left, he's got us. He's calling it in. How many can he tell before ice put him down? Now, you have to take him now. But the clever man was moving, ducking behind rock, appearing and disappearing, and Emily's crosshairs chased him across the valley and could not quite catch him. And every second he lived was a second closer to a whole enemy line turning its guns up at the eastern ridge. He's behind the outcrop, Sullivan said tight. He's going to pop up on the right side, 480. Emily, when he shows, you'll have half a second. Emily settled the crosshairs on the right edge of the outcrop. She stopped chasing. She stopped hunting. She did the hardest thing a shooter can do, which is to be perfectly still and let the target come to the bullet instead of sending the bullet after the target. Come on, she whispered. Come on, show me. Half a second. The clever man rose on the right side of the outcrop with a radio to his mouth, and in that half a second before he could speak one word into it, Emily squeezed, and 480 meters away, the radio and the man holding it went silent forever. Down, Sullivan exhaled. He's down. He didn't get it out. Emily, he didn't get the call out. But it was too late for that to matter, and they both knew it, because the clever man had already pointed, and half the ring had already seen where he was pointing. And now, for the first time, the guns of Victor Rahman's fighters swung up off the trapped seals and turned toward the eastern ridge, toward Emily. The first rounds cracked overhead a heartbeat later. Incoming, Sullivan barked, flattening himself. They've got the ridge. They've got our line. Get down. But Emily did not get down. Emily could not get down because, in the terrible math of that morning, every second she spent hiding was a second the enemy spent breathing, and every enemy breathing was a round closer to the 7 men in the rocks. So Emily Carter stayed exactly where she was, with bullets snapping past her head and chewing the shale a foot from her face, and she kept shooting. Give me targets, she said in that same dead calm voice, as if the whole world were not trying to kill her. Emily, they've got us ranged. You have to move. Give me targets. Sullivan or those 7 men die while we crawl around saving ourselves. For 1 second, Sullivan froze, torn between the training that screamed at him to survive and the woman beside him who had already decided that 7 strangers mattered more than her own life. And in that second, watching her, something broke open in Jake Sullivan, and something better grew in its place. He got back on the glass, under fire, with rounds tearing the air a foot above his spine. Okay, he said, and his voice was steady, now steady as hers. Okay, we do this together. 2 shooters just found the leader on the right flank. 440. Slight right to left, trust the dead air. Send it. Emily sent it. The right flank leader fell. It was 0459. The enemy was firing on their position. Now the ridge was no longer a secret, and the 2 of them lay exposed on bare rock with nothing but speed and nerve between them and death, and they kept working. Shot after shot, Sullivan calling wind through the crack of incoming rounds, Emily squeezing between heartbeats. The enemy ring-bleeding men from a ghost they could see now, but still could not hit, because 400 meters in the worst wind in the country cut both ways, and the fighters spraying at the ridge could not find the woman who was picking them apart one breath at a time. 9, Sullivan said. 10. Emily, that's 10. The ring's coming apart. They're pulling off our guys to fire on us. There's a gap opening on the north side. Commander, Emily said into the radio, still firing. North side. The ring is breaking on the north side. That's your corridor. When I say move, you move, and you do not stop for anything. We've got Delgado down, Hayes said. He can't walk. Then carry him, Emily said. You do not leave a man in that valley, Commander, not while I've got rounds. Carry him and run, and I will hold the road open. And then the second thing went wrong. Emily's rifle ran dry. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber, and for one horrible instant, the ridge went quiet on her side, and she rolled to reload in her damaged right hand, the hand a doctor had told her would never do precision work again. The hand that had held steady through 11 perfect kills chose that exact moment to betray her. The magazine slipped. It slipped out of her trembling fingers and tumbled down the shale out of reach. And Emily's spare was in the pouch on her right side, the side facing the incoming fire, and to get it, she would have to expose herself completely for 2 full seconds, while every gun in the valley was hunting her ridge. Emily, Sullivan said. He had seen it. Emily, don't. Stay down. I'll get you loaded. There's no time, she said. The ring's still breaking. If I stop now, it closes back up. You reach for that pouch and you're dead. They'll cut you in half. Then load me from your side, she said. Sullivan, reach across me. Load my rifle from the left. Your body's already on that side. You won't have to expose anything. And it was insane, and it was against every rule, and it meant Jake Sullivan had to reach his whole arm across the body of the woman he had once tried to break with, rounds snapping over both of them, and press a magazine into her rifle while she held it. The 2 of them tangled together on a bare ridge under fire, working as one single creature with 4 hands and one purpose. He did it. Of course he did it. He reached across her, and he seated the magazine, and Emily's steady left hand racked the bolt, and in under 3 seconds, the rifle was live again. You're loaded, Sullivan gasped. Go, go, you're loaded. Wind. Same seam, send it. She sent it. 12, and the north gap yawned wider. It was 0502, And down in the rocks, Commander Hayes made the decision that every commander dreads and every commander eventually has to make. He decided to trust someone else with the lives of his men. All elements, Hayes said into the radio, and his voice was iron. We are moving, North Corridor. 2 men on Delgado, everybody else covers. Carter, we are stepping off in 3-2. Go, Emily said. I've got the road. Go now. And they went. 7 Americans broke from the rocks that had trapped them for a night and a morning. 2 of them dragging a wounded man between them, and they ran for the North Gap while Emily Carter rained death from the eastern ridge to keep it open. She was not aiming for kills now. She was aiming for the fighters who might close the gap, the ones swinging around to cut off the escape, and she was dropping them before they could get set. Reading the wind, trusting the dead air, breathing between heartbeats, her damaged hand trembling and steadying with every shot. They're moving. Sullivan called, tracking the SEALs through the glass. They're moving good. They're halfway to the gap. 2 hostiles swinging left to cut them off 10 o'clock. I see them. She saw them. She took them. Both. Gap's still open, Sullivan said. Emily, it's working. It's actually working. They're going to make it. And then the third thing went wrong. And this one nearly ended everything. Because Victor Rahman was not a stupid man, and Victor Rahman was not a patient man for nothing, and Victor Rahman had spent the whole terrible night learning exactly how the Americans thought. And so when the ring broke on the north side and the trapped men ran for the gap, Rahman was not surprised and Rahman was not panicked, because Rahman had already put his best fighters in exactly the place the Americans would run to. It was a trap inside the trap. Emily, Sullivan said, and the joy drained out of his voice all at once. Emily, wait. That gap's too easy. What? They wanted it open. Look at the far side of the gap. There's a whole element dug in on the far ridge. They're not firing. They're waiting. Our guys are running right into a kill zone. The North Gap isn't a corridor. His voice cracked. It's a funnel. Rahman built it. He wants them in the open and then he closes it. Emily's whole body went cold. She swung her scope to the far ridge and there they were. A dozen fighters dug in, silent, disciplined, waiting for 7 Americans to run into the open ground of the gap so they could be slaughtered all at once. She had been so focused on breaking the ring that she had run the SEALs straight toward the guns Rahman had been saving. She keyed the radio, and for the first time all morning there was fear in her voice. Ground stop. Stop. Do not enter the gap. It's a trap. There's an element on the far ridge. You're running into a kill zone. But they were already committed. 7 men in the open dragging a wounded brother halfway across ground with no cover, and a dozen guns rising on the far ridge to cut them down. Carter, Hayes shouted over the radio, and now there was raw terror in his voice too, because he could see it now. He could see the guns rising, and there was nowhere left to run and no way to go back. Carter, we're exposed. We're in the open. They've got us. They've got all of us. Carter, do something. And here it was. Here was the moment the whole night had been driving toward. 12 enemy guns rising on the far ridge. 7 Americans frozen in the open with a wounded man between them and 1 young woman on the eastern ridge with a trembling hand and a rifle and 400 meters of the worst wind in the country. Sullivan grabbed her arm. Emily, 12 of them, dug in disciplined, and they're all about to fire at once. You can't get 12 before they get our guys. Nobody can. It's not. His voice broke. It's not possible. And Emily Carter, lying on that ridge, with the lives of 7 men bleeding out of the seconds, turned her head and looked at Jake Sullivan, and something in her face made him let go of her arm. Because it was not fear. It was not doubt. It was the calm, terrible certainty of a woman who had spent her whole life being told what was not possible right up until the moment she did it. My father made a shot at Kandahar that saved 11 men, she said quietly, settling back behind the rifle. Everyone said it wasn't possible either. He did it anyway. And then he died on a mountain like this one, making another one. Her damaged hand settled onto the rifle and it trembled, and she breathed it still one last time. I've been carrying his name my whole life, Sullivan. Now watch me earn it. Emily. Wind, she said. Fast, give me the whole far ridge left to right and don't stop talking until I do. And Jake Sullivan, staring at the woman he had once tried to break, understood at last that he was not lying next to a candidate or a diversity project or the female sniper. He was lying next to the best rifle he would ever see in his life. And he got on the glass and he started calling wind faster than he had ever called it, and he prayed. Far left, 490 right to left, trust the dead air, Sullivan said, the words tumbling out. She's dropping off the far ridge, favor high shoulder, send it. She sent it. The far left fighter died before he could fire. Next 500, same wind, send it. She sent it. 2. And the far ridge erupted the enemy, realizing all at once that their trap had a hole in it, that the ghost on the eastern ridge had found them too, and their guns swung off the 7 Americans in the open and turned to the desperate business of finding the woman who was killing them. And that was exactly what Emily needed, because every gun that turned toward her was a gun that stopped pointing at the men in the gap. "They're off our guys," Sullivan shouted. "They're firing on us. They're off our guys, Emily, keep going. Ground move, get out of the gap, run, run." And in the rocks below, Hayes heard it, and Hayes understood what the woman on the ridge had done, that she had made herself the target, that she had reached up and pulled every enemy gun onto her own body to buy his men a path. And Hayes's voice went ragged as he screamed his men forward through the gap. "Move, move, everybody! Move! That's our shot, go!" Emily kept firing. 3, 4. The Far Ridge fighters were scrambling now, some firing at her, some diving for cover, the disciplined ambush dissolving into chaos, and the 7 Americans were up and running again, through the gap, through the funnel, toward the safe ground beyond, dragging Delgado between them. It was 0505, and Emily Carter had a whole enemy ridge shooting at her, and she did not stop, and she did not flinch, and she did not miss. 5, Sullivan counted. 6, Emily, our guys are through, they're through the gap, they're clear, they made it, you did it. But Emily did not lower the rifle, because through her scope in the chaos of the collapsing ambush, she had just seen something. A figure on the far ridge standing where no sane man would stand, while a sniper worked a man with a cruel mouth and eyes like 2 black stones screaming at his fleeing fighters, trying to hold his broken trap together by sheer force of rage. Victor Rahman, the man who had promised the whole world that no woman would ever save those 7 men. Standing in the open, 400 meters and change away, in the worst wind in the country. "Sullivan," Emily said very quietly. "Far ridge, the one standing, the one screaming." Sullivan swung the glass, and she heard the breath catch in his throat. "That's him," Sullivan whispered. "That's Rahman. That's the whole reason those 7 men came up this mountain. Emily, that's the target. Wind. Emily, our guys are clear. We don't have to take him. We can pull off this ridge right now and live." "Sullivan." She did not move her eye from the scope. "That man built a trap to make 7 Americans watch each other die for his cameras. He is going to do it again next month to 7 other men's sons. My father spent his whole life climbing mountains to stop men exactly like that one." Her damaged hand trembled on the rifle and she breathed, and it went still, perfectly still. "Give me the wind." For one heartbeat, Jake Sullivan looked at the woman beside him. And then he stopped arguing, because he understood finally and completely that some people are put on this earth to make the shots that no one else can make, and that the only thing left for the rest of us to do is call the wind for them and get out of the way. 460 meters, Sullivan said, and his voice was calm now and clear and certain. "Left to right at the muzzle, 6 miles an hour. She swings right to left in the valley, and then she does. Dead calm on the far ridge, right where he's standing." He drew a breath. "Trust the dead air, Emily. Trust everything your father taught you, and send it home." Emily Carter waited for the edge of an exhale. She waited for the still pause between 2 heartbeats. The little window where even a damaged hand goes quiet, where the tremble stops, where the whole shaking, doubting, terrified world falls silent, and there is nothing left but a bullet and a target and the wind she had been reading since she was a little girl in a canyon with her father's hand on her shoulder. And in that silence, 460 meters away, in the worst wind in the country on a mountain that had already tried to kill her a dozen ways before dawn, Captain Emily Carter, the woman, a hospital had tried to retire the woman. 24 elite operators had written off the daughter of a legend, gripped a rifle in a hand that would not stop shaking, and got ready to keep the promise she had made her father on the worst night of her life. She let out her breath, and she began to squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the round left the barrel at 0506, and it flew 460 meters through 3 separate winds toward a man who had promised the whole world that no woman would ever stop him. And Victor Rahman moved. At the last possible instant, some animal instinct that had kept him alive through 20 years of war made him turn his head and step in Emily's rounder round that should have taken him through the chest, tore instead through the meat of his shoulder and spun him off his feet. "Hit," Sullivan said, then sharper. No, he moved on you. It's a shoulder. He's still up, Emily. He's crawling for cover. He's still alive." Emily was already working the bolt. "Where?" "Behind the rocks on the far ridge, left side. He's dragging himself. You've got maybe one more second before he's gone." But the second was already spent. Victor Rahman vanished behind a shelf of stone, wounded, bleeding, and alive, and for the first time all morning, Emily Carter did not have a shot. She lay there behind the rifle, breathing hard, and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She had missed. Not clean, not fatally, but she had missed the shot that mattered most, and the man who had built a trap to make 7 Americans die on camera was still breathing. "Emily," Sullivan said. "Emily, our guys are clear. Rahman's wounded and running. We did what we came to do. We can pull off this ridge right now and everybody goes home. Let it go." For a moment, she almost did. The reasonable part of her, the part that wanted to live, the part that knew a wounded warlord dragging himself into the rocks, was still a victory by any honest measure. That part of her wanted to slide back off the ridge and disappear into the dawn. But then the radio crackled, and it was Hayes, and his voice was not celebrating. "Overwatch, this is ground. We're clear of the gap, but we are not clear of the valley. And I've got a problem." A pause. "Delgado's bad, real bad. We stopped the bleeding, but he's going into shock, and we've still got 2 kilometers of open ground to the extraction point, and the weather's still got our birds grounded. We can't carry him 2 clicks under fire. If Rahman's people regroup, they'll run us down before we ever reach that LZ." It was 0508, 7 men in the open, a wounded brother dying between them, 2 kilometers to safety, and a warlord bleeding but alive who could rally what was left of his fighters and turn a rescue back into a slaughter. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. "Commander," she said, "how many fighters do they have left?" "Hard to count," Hayes said. "You thinned them bad. Maybe 8, maybe 10 still up and mobile. But that's 10 more than we can handle out here in the open with a man down." "Then I keep the ridge," Emily said. "So?" Sullivan's head snapped toward her. "Emily, I keep the ridge," she said again into the radio. "You move for the extraction point, slow, careful, take care of Delgado. And every fighter that tries to chase you across that open ground, I take off the board before he closes the distance. I'm your wall, Commander. Nobody gets through me." There was a silence on the line. "Carter," Hayes said quietly, "you keep that ridge. You're staying behind alone. The rest of us move to the LZ. You're 2 kilometers the wrong direction, covering us, and Rahman's people know exactly where you are now. You'd be 1 shooter and a spotter holding an entire enemy remnant off 7 men's backs." A pause. "That's not a plan. That's a last stand." "Then it's a last stand," Emily said. "Yours or mine, Commander. Pick one. Because I am not going to lie on this ridge and watch 7 men I bled to save get run down in the open 2 kilometers from home." Sullivan grabbed her shoulder. "You're not doing this alone." She looked at him. "Whatever you just volunteered us for," Sullivan said, and his jaw was set. "It's us, not you. Us. I'm not crawling off this mountain and leaving the best shooter I've ever seen to hold a ridge by herself so a bunch of guys who never gave you the time of day can walk home. If you're the wall, I'm the mortar in it. That's final." For a moment, Emily just looked at him, at the man who 3 weeks ago had let go of a dummy to watch her fall in the sand, who now was volunteering to die on a ridge beside her. "Okay," she said quietly, "then we're the wall. Both of us." "Both of us," Sullivan said. "Ground, this is Overwatch," Emily said. "The East Ridge is covered. You have 2 shooters holding your back door. Move your men and save Delgado. We've got the rest." And Hayes, 2 kilometers away in the gray dawn with a dying man and 6 exhausted operators, understood that he was being handed a gift that he had no right to accept and no ability to refuse. He understood that a woman he had brought into his program on a debt to a dead friend was now offering to trade her life for his men's, and that the only way to honor it was to make it count. "Copy Overwatch," Hayes said, and his voice was thick. "We're moving. And Carter." A pause. "Your father would be out of his mind proud right now. You know that." Emily's throat tightened, but her voice came out steady. Tell me that when all 7 of them are on the bird commander. Now move. It was 05:10 and the second half of the fight began. Down in the valley, the SEAL element rose from cover and began the long, agonizing crawl toward the extraction point. 2 men carrying Delgado in a fireman's drag, the rest fanned out around them, moving from rock to rock across ground that offered almost nothing to hide behind. And Rahman's fighters, scattered and leaderless, but not beaten, began to see them go. The first one broke from cover to give chase. "Runner," Sullivan called. 3 o'clock, chasing our guys, 400, moving fast right to left. Emily let him breathe, squeezed. The runner tumbled into the dirt and did not get up. "Down," Sullivan said. "Nice." Next, 2 more coming out of the rocks behind him. They saw our guys moving. They were going to swarm. And that was the pattern that held for the next terrible stretch of minutes. Every time one of Rahman's fighters saw the wounded Americans crawling towards safety and broke cover to chase them down, a round came out of the eastern ridge and put him in the dirt. Emily was not breaking a ring anymore. She was tending a wall, 1 brick at a time, and every brick was a man who wanted to kill the people she had bled all morning to save. 2, 3, 4 runners down. "They're figuring it out," Sullivan said. "They're not chasing straight anymore. They're using the rocks. They're working toward our guys under cover. Harder shots now, Emily. Quick looks, half a second gone." "Then call them fast," Emily said, "and I'll shoot them faster." It was 05:14, and that was when the 5th thing went wrong. Sullivan, sweeping the valley through the glass, suddenly went rigid. "Emily, movement on our ridge, behind us, 6 o'clock low." Emily's blood went to ice. Behind them, on their own ridge. It meant that while they had been focused on the valley, some of Rahman's fighters had peeled off, circled wide in the dark, and climbed the eastern ridge to come at the 2 of them from behind. The wall was being flanked. "How many?" Emily breathed, not daring to move. "I count 3, maybe 4. Coming up the back slope, slow, quiet. They know exactly where we are." Sullivan's hand went to his rifle. "Emily, if they get up here, it's over. 2 of us dug in facing the wrong way and them coming up our blind side. We can't watch the valley and our own back at the same time." And there it was, the trap that Rahman had built inside the trap that Rahman had built. The warlord, wounded, bleeding into the rocks, had still had the presence of mind to send men climbing to kill the shooter, who was unraveling everything. He had turned Emily's greatest strength, her perch on the high ridge, into the place where she would die. For 1 second, Emily Carter felt the whole impossible weight of it. 7 men crawling for their lives in the valley, depending on her to keep the wall. 4 fighters climbing the slope behind her, coming to put a knife in her back. And no way, no possible way for 2 people to do both. Then she made a decision that Jake Sullivan would remember for the rest of his life. "You take the back," she said. "What?" "You take the back slope. You turn around, you cover our 6, and you kill anything that comes up that hill. I keep the valley. I keep the wall. 7 men still need me facing forward. Sullivan and I trust you with my life at my back. So you hold our 6, and I'll hold theirs, and neither of us looks over our shoulder. You understand me?" Sullivan stared at her, because what she had just done in one breath under the worst pressure a soldier can face was split an impossible problem, clean in half and hand him the half that meant her life was in his hands. She would face the valley. She would have her back completely, utterly exposed. And the only thing standing between Emily Carter and a bullet in her spine was Jake Sullivan and his rifle. The man who had once tried to break her was now the only thing keeping her alive. "I've got your back," Sullivan said, and his voice cracked with the enormity of it. "Emily, I swear to God, nothing comes up this hill. Nothing gets to you. You just keep facing forward and do what you do. I've got you." "I know you do," she said simply. And she turned back to the valley, and she put her whole life in his hands, and she never looked over her shoulder again. It was 05:16, and now they were 2 soldiers fighting back to back on a bare ridge, one facing forward towards 7 men who needed a wall, one facing backward toward 4 men who had come to kill them both. Sullivan fired first. The lead fighter on the back slope 40 meters out and closing took Sullivan's round through the chest and slid back down the shale. "1 down," Sullivan grunted. 3 left. They're going to ground. They're spreading out. And in front, Emily kept working the valley. "Runner," she said to herself and squeezed. "Down. 2 more at the tree line. Squeeze, squeeze, down, down." Behind her, Sullivan's rifle cracked again. Two down on the slope, two left. Emily, they're smart. They're using the rocks. I've lost eyes on both of them. Then wait for them, Emily said, echoing what her father had told her a lifetime ago. Don't chase. Be still. Let them come to you. Sullivan went still, and he waited. And 30 seconds later, when the third fighter rose from behind a boulder to rush the last 20 meters, Sullivan was ready, and the man never made it past 10. 3, Sullivan said. One left. One left somewhere on this slope, and I can't see him. And in front, the valley was thinning out. Emily's wall was holding. The runners were fewer now and slower and more afraid because every man who chased the Americans died, and even the most fanatical fighter eventually learns that a ghost on a ridge is death, and death is not worth the chase. Ground, this is Overwatch, Emily said. How far to the LZ? 1 kilometer, Hayes gasped. We're at 1 kilometer. Delgado's still with us. Barely. We're moving, Carter. We're moving. Don't stop covering us. I'm not going anywhere, Commander, Emily said. But she was wrong. Because at 0519, the last fighter on the back slope, the one Sullivan had lost, made his move. And he did not make it for Sullivan. He made it for Emily. He had circled wide, this last man, wide and low and patient, and he had watched and he had understood that the woman facing the valley was the one killing everyone and that the man facing the slope was watching the wrong angle. And so he came up not on Sullivan's arc of fire, but around the far edge of it, low along the spine of the ridge, straight for the exposed back of the woman with the rifle. Sullivan saw him a half-second too late. Emily, down, Sullivan screamed and swung his rifle, but the man was inside his arc now, too close, moving too fast, rising up right behind Emily with his weapon coming up. And there was no time for Sullivan to fire without the risk of hitting her. No time for anything, no time at all. And Emily Carter, who had promised her father she would never quit, did the only thing left to do. She let go of the rifle that had been her whole life, rolled onto her back, and drew the pistol from her hip with her left hand, her steady hand, the hand that did not shake, and she fired up into the man standing over her from 3 feet away, and she did not miss. The fighter dropped where he stood. For a long, ringing second, neither of them moved. Emily on her back with a smoking pistol in her steady left hand. Sullivan, frozen with his rifle, half swung, his face white as bone. The dead man crumpled between them. Emily, Sullivan choked. Emily, are you hit? Are you hit? Talk to me. I'm not hit, she said. Her voice was shaking now just slightly, the adrenaline finally finding its way through the calm. I'm not hit, Sullivan. I'm okay. She sat up and her hands were trembling, both of them now, and she looked at the man she had just killed at arm's length, and then she looked at Sullivan. You said nothing would get up this hill. Sullivan's face crumpled. Emily, I'm sorry I lost him. I lost him in the rocks. He came around my... Sullivan. She reached out and grabbed his arm. I'm alive. You covered 3. I got the 4th. That's the job. That's the wall holding. Don't you dare carry this. She squeezed his arm hard. We're okay. We're still here. And there are still 7 men who need us. So get back on that glass and I'm getting back on that rifle and we finish this. You with me? For 1 second, Jake Sullivan looked like he might come apart entirely. And then Emily's grip on his arm and the steel in her voice and the sheer unkillable will of the woman in front of him pulled him back from the edge. And he nodded and he wiped his face with the back of his hand. I'm with you, he said hoarsely. God, Emily, I'm with you. It was 0521, and they turned back, one to the valley and one to the slope, and they became the wall again. But something had changed in the valley below. Emily got back on her scope and swept it, and she went very still because the runners had stopped coming. The chase had broken. The fighters who were left, and there were not many now, were no longer pursuing the Americans across the open ground. They were pulling back. They were melting into the rocks. They had learned finally and completely that the ridge was death, and they wanted no more of it. Commander, Emily said slowly, they've stopped. The pursuit's broken. They're pulling back into the high rocks. Say again, Overwatch. They quit, Commander, Emily said, and she almost could not believe the words as she said them. They quit chasing you. You've got a clear run to the LZ. There's nobody left with the stomach to come across that open ground. And in the valley, Commander Daniel Hayes stopped in his tracks, and he looked back over 2 kilometers of open ground littered with the fighters who had died trying to run his men down, and he understood what the woman on the ridge had done. She had not just broken a ring. She had not just kept a wall. She had broken the will of an entire enemy, remnant one man at a time, until the survivors would rather flee into the mountains than take one more step toward the ghost on the eastern ridge. "Carter," Hayes said, and his voice broke completely now. "Carter, I've got the LZ in sight. We're 400 meters from the LZ, and the weather's breaking. I can hear the birds. Carter, I can hear the birds inbound. We're going to make it, all 7 of us. We're going to make it home." Emily closed her eyes, and for just a moment on that freezing ridge with the smell of gun smoke around her and a dead man 3 feet away, and her hands finally allowed to shake, she let herself feel it. 7 men, all 7, coming home. "Copy ground," she managed. "That's real good to hear." But it was not over, because there was still Victor Rahman. Emily swept her scope back to the far ridge to the shelf of rock, where the wounded warlord had dragged himself out of sight, and she waited because she knew men like Rahman, or thought she did, and she did not believe for one second that a man who had built a trap inside a trap would simply crawl away and bleed quietly into the rocks. She was right. "Sullivan," she said, "far ridge, left side. Tell me what you see behind that rock shelf where Rahman went down." Sullivan swung the glass and his breath caught. "There's movement. He's Emily, he's not hiding. He's moving, he's got someone with him. He's got a fighter helping him up, and there's—" He stopped. "There's a vehicle. Behind the shelf, a truck. He's trying to get to a vehicle and escape out the back of the valley." It was 0524, and Emily Carter faced the last decision of the morning. Rahman was wounded. Rahman was fleeing. The 7 Americans were 400 meters from the LZ, and the birds were inbound, and the fight by every measure that counted was won. She could let the warlord crawl into his truck and drive away into the mountains, and she would have done more in one morning than any shooter in the program's history, and no one on earth would ever fault her for it. But she thought of the cameras. She thought of Rahman's promise to the whole world that no one would save those 7 men. She thought of the 7 other men's sons he would trap on some other mountain next month, and the month after that, because a warlord who escapes to fight again is a debt that gets paid in other people's children. And she thought of her father on a mountain like this one, spending the last shot of his life to stop a man exactly like Victor Rahman. "Sullivan," she said quietly, "range to that truck." "Emily," Sullivan lowered the glass and looked at her. "We won. Our guys are almost on the bird. Rahman's finished. He's running. He'll bleed out or he'll crawl into a hole. We don't have to take this shot. We can walk off this mountain right now, both of us alive. Range to the truck, Sullivan." Sullivan looked at her for a long moment, and then he understood the way he had understood on the far ridge an hour ago, that some things could not be argued with, and that the woman beside him had made a promise to a dead man that she intended to keep no matter what it cost. He got back on the glass. 490 meters, he said. "He's at the truck. He's getting in the passenger side, the fighter's driving." "Emily, the truck's going to move, and once it moves, the wind on a moving target in this valley at this range." He shook his head. "That's not a shot. That's not even close to a shot. Nobody makes that shot." "My father did," Emily said, "at Kandahar. A moving vehicle at 500 meters in a crosswind. 11 men lived because of it. Everyone said it was impossible until he did it." She settled behind the rifle, and her damaged hand came to rest on it, and it trembled faint as a candle flame, and she breathed it still one final time on one final morning. "He taught me that shot, Sullivan. He made me practice it 1,000 times in a canyon back home. He always said I'd need it someday, and I never believed him." The truck's engine turned over. She could see the exhaust. "Wind," she said, and Jake Sullivan, lying beside the best shooter he would ever know on a ridge, where they had both nearly died a dozen times before dawn, drew a breath and called the wind one last time, and his voice was calm and clear and certain and full of a faith he had not known he was capable of 3 weeks ago. 490, and the truck's going to accelerate left to right when it moves," he said. "Left to right at the muzzle 6 miles an hour. She swings right to left through the valley. And she dies to dead calm right at the far ridge where he is. You'll have to lead the Troy, Emily, lead it hard, put the round where he's going to be, and trust the dead air to hold it there when it arrives." He swallowed. "Trust everything he taught you, every single thing, and send it home." The truck began to move, and Emily Carter did the thing she had been born to do, the thing a hospital had tried to take from her. The thing 24 men had said she could not do, the thing her father had spent his life teaching her to do, on a morning he did not live to see. She led the moving truck across the valley floor. She found the seam in the wind, where one current handed the bullet to the next. She waited for the edge of an exhale, and the still pause between two heartbeats, where even a damaged hand goes quiet. And in that silence 490 meters away, in a valley of the worst wind in the country, on a moving target that no one should have been able to hit, she squeezed. The rifle bucked, and for one endless, impossible second, the round flew leading the truck, riding the wind, dying to the dead air exactly where Sullivan had called it, and exactly where her father had taught her it would go. And the whole morning, the whole 6 months, the whole life of Captain Emily Carter came down to a single bullet crossing a valley toward a man who had promised the world that she would fail. The round went through the passenger window. The truck swerved and slowed and rolled to a stop against the rocks and did not move again. "Hit," Sullivan whispered. He was staring through the glass and he could not seem to make his voice work. Emily, that's a hit on a moving vehicle at 490 meters in this wind." He lowered the glass and turned and looked at her, and his eyes were wet. "That's Rahman. He's down. He's confirmed down. It's over. My God, it's over." Emily did not lower the rifle right away. She stayed behind it for a moment, breathing, watching the still truck through her scope, and something moved through her that she had no words for, something that felt like grief and triumph and homecoming all at once. She had made the shot, her father's shot, the one he taught her in a canyon a lifetime ago, the one he swore she would need someday. She had needed it, and she had made it. "Copy hit," she said softly into the radio, and only then did she let the rifle come down. The radio was silent for a long moment. Then Hayes's voice came through, and it was not a commander's voice anymore. It was just a man's cracked open and full. "Overwatch," Hayes said. "Confirm your last. Confirm the target." "Target's down, Commander," Emily said. "Victor Rahman is down. Moving vehicle 490 meters. He's not walking away from this one. He's not trapping anybody's sons next month. It's finished." And 2 kilometers away, at the edge of a landing zone, with the sound of inbound helicopters finally breaking through the clearing weather, Commander Daniel Hayes lowered his head, and the 6 exhausted men around him lowered theirs, and Delgado, half-conscious on a makeshift litter, whispered something none of them quite caught, and Hayes keyed his radio one last time. "Carter," he said, "in 22 years, we have never seen anything like what you did on that ridge tonight. Not from anybody, not once." His voice shook. "You saved 7 men who wrote you off. You broke a force 5 times your number. And you took Rahman with a shot I would have sworn on my life was impossible." A pause. "Your father made a shot like that once, at Kandahar. Saved 11 men. I was one of them, Carter. Did you know that the shot that saved my life all those years ago, that was your father?" His voice broke completely. "And tonight his daughter saved 7 more. The Carters have saved my life twice now across 30 years in 2 different wars. I don't know how a man repays a debt like that, but I am going to spend the rest of my life trying." Emily sat on the ridge with the rifle across her knees and the dawn finally breaking gray and gold over the mountains, and she could not speak. Because she had not known. She had not known that the commander who pulled her out of a hospital and into this program, the man who had believed in her when no one else would, was one of the 11 her father saved at Kandahar. She had spent her whole life thinking her father's greatest shot belonged to strangers. And now she knew that one of those strangers had reached across 30 years to give her the chance to become the shooter her father always believed she could be. The circle had closed, and she had not even known she was standing inside it. "Commander," she finally managed, and her voice was thick. "I didn't know about Kandahar, about you." "I know you didn't," Hayes said gently. "I never told you. I didn't want you carrying it up that mountain. I wanted you to make the shot for those 7 men. Not for me, not for a debt, for them." A pause. "And you did. You made it for them, Carter. That's why it counted." Beside her, Jake Sullivan slowly sat up, and he looked at the woman he had tried to break on a beach 3 weeks ago, the woman he had just fought back-to-back with on a bare ridge, the woman who had saved his life and the lives of 7 other men and had never once, not for a single second, quit. "Emily," he said quietly. She looked at him. "On the beach," Sullivan said. "I let go of that dummy because I was scared you were better than me. And I was right, you are. You're the best I've ever seen, and I don't know, I just mean the shooting." He shook his head slowly. I mean all of it. What you did up here, facing the valley with your back wide open and trusting me to cover it, trading your life for 7 guys who never gave you a chance. I've been in this a long time and I've never seen anybody carry what you carried tonight. His voice cracked. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. And I'm so damn proud that I got to call the win for you when it counted. Emily looked at him for a long moment, and then for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she smiled. You called it perfect, Sullivan, she said. Every shot, even the last one, especially the last one. She reached out and gripped his forearm the way soldiers do. I couldn't have made a single one of them without you. We were the wall, both of us. Remember, both of us, Sullivan said, and his voice broke and he gripped her arm back, and the two of them sat there on the ridge in the breaking dawn, no longer a candidate in a top score, no longer a woman, and the men who doubted her, but simply 2 soldiers who had done the impossible together and lived to feel the sun come up. It was 0531. And down in the valley, the helicopter swept in at last through the clearing sky, and 7 American operators, one of them wounded but alive, climbed aboard and lifted off the mountain that Victor Rahman had promised would be their grave. All 7 of them, just like she said. And as the birds banked over the eastern ridge on their way out, every man aboard turned to look down at the 2 small figures sitting side by side on the high rocks. The shooter and her spotter. The wall that had held, and one by one without a word being spoken. 7 exhausted, bleeding, saved American soldiers raised their hands in salute to the woman that all of them, every single one, had once been so certain would fail. The helicopters touched down at the forward base at 0714, and the moment the wheels kissed the tarmac, everything Emily Carter had been holding together for 8 straight hours finally started to give way. Not all at once. She was too much her father's daughter for that. But as she climbed down from the bird with her rifle slung across her back and her hands trembling, for the first time in a way she could no longer hide, she felt her knees soften under her, and she had to grab the door frame to keep from folding right there on the runway in front of everyone. Sullivan was at her side before she even finished the thought. I've got you, he said quietly, hooking his arm under hers. Easy, I've got you. You held it together up there for 8 hours, Emily. Nobody's watching now. You're allowed to come apart down here where it's safe. I'm not coming apart, she said. But her voice cracked clean in half on the last word, and Sullivan just tightened his grip and said nothing, because he'd learned somewhere on that mountain that the strongest thing you can do for a person is not argue with the lie they need to tell themselves for 1 more minute. Okay, he said, you're not coming apart. Just lean on me while you're not coming apart. And she did. Ahead of them, the medics were already swarming the second bird. The one carrying Delgado, and Emily's whole body went rigid at the sight of it because for 8 hours, the only thing that had kept her firing on that ridge was the belief, the flat refusal to accept anything else, that all 7 of them would make it home. And if Delgado died now on the tarmac after all of it, she did not know what she would do with that. She did not think she would survive it. Sullivan, she said, Delgado, I have to see. Then we go see, come on. They pushed through the chaos of the flight line toward the second bird, and Emily's heart was slamming against her ribs, and she saw the medics lifting the litter down, and she saw Delgado's face gray and slack and bloodless, and for one horrible instant, she was certain she was too late, that the man had bled out somewhere in that last brutal 2 kilometers, that she had held an entire wall by herself for a corpse. And then Delgado's eyes fluttered open, and they found her. Across the whole roaring flight line, out of every face in that chaos, his eyes found hers. And through cracked, colorless lips, in a whisper barely louder than the dying rotor wash, the wounded operator said the first words anyone had heard him say in over an hour. You're her, Delgado breathed. You're the one. The ridge. Emily dropped to her knees beside the litter so fast it hurt. Don't talk. Don't waste it. The medics have you. Now you're home. You're safe. Just breathe. But Delgado's hand came up off the litter, shaking, searching, and it found her wrist, and it closed around it with everything the man had left in him, which was almost nothing, and it was still enough to stop her heart. I heard the commander, he whispered, on the radio the whole time I was down. I heard every word he said to you, every shot. I heard him tell you if you missed, we'd die. His eyes filled and spilled over. I've got 3 kids, ma'am, 3 little girls back home in Ohio, and I already made my peace up there. I already said goodbye to them in my head. And then you. His voice broke apart completely. And then you started shooting. Delgado, I'm gonna see them again, he wept. I'm gonna walk my girls down the aisle someday because of you. And I don't even. His grip tightened on her wrist. I don't even know your name. The woman who gave me my whole life back, and I don't know her name. Carter, she said, and now she was crying too, kneeling on the tarmac with a dying man's grip on her wrist, and she did not care who saw it. Emily Carter. Emily Carter. Delgado repeated slow and deliberate, like he was carving it into stone, like it was the single most important thing he would ever memorize. My girls are going to know that name. I swear it before God. Emily Carter. My girls are going to grow up saying their prayers to a woman named Emily Carter who gave them back their daddy. And then the medics were lifting him, sweeping him away toward the surgical tent at a run, and his hand slid off her wrist, and Emily knelt there on the cold tarmac with the ghost of his grip still burning on her skin, and she could not move, and she could not breathe. And Jake Sullivan crouched down beside her in the rotor wash and put one hand flat between her shoulder blades and let her come apart at last quietly where only he could see. 3 little girls, Emily whispered. Sullivan, he's got 3 little girls. And tonight they've got a father, Sullivan said softly. Because of you. You listen to me now. When the hard nights come, and they're going to come, Emily, the ones where you can't sleep and you're seeing every shot behind your eyes, you hold on to Delgado. You hold on to those 3 little girls in Ohio. That's the truth of what you did up there. Not the 25. Not Rahman. 3 little girls have a daddy tonight because Emily Carter refused to quit. It was 7:21. And that was the exact moment Emily Carter finally understood all the way down to the marrow of her bones what she had really done on that mountain. It had never been about the 25. It had never been about the impossible shots or proving the doubters wrong or the name she carried. It was about a man named Delgado and 3 little girls in Ohio who would never ever know how close they had come to growing up without their father. She let Sullivan help her to her feet, and she wiped her face with the back of her trembling hand, and she squared her shoulders. And she said, okay, I'm okay now. For real this time. I know you are, Sullivan said, and this time he believed her. The debrief came an hour later after the medics had checked her over and pronounced her exhausted and dehydrated and otherwise whole after she had eaten something she could not taste and drunk water she could not remember drinking. They filed into a bare plywood room with a tactical map pinned to one wall, the 6 operators of the trapped element who could still walk, plus Sullivan, plus Emily, plus Commander Hayes, and for a long moment nobody said a single word. The silence in that room was its own kind of prayer. Then the ranking man of the trapped element stood up. He was a weathered senior chief named Ramirez, 19 years in the teams, a man with a face like cracked leather and eyes that had seen every ugly thing the world had to offer. And he did something Emily had never in her life seen a man like him do. He walked across that plywood room to where she sat, and he came to rigid attention in front of her, in front of a captain, which was backwards, which broke every rule of rank there was, and he raised his hand in a salute, and he held it. Chief, Emily said, startled, half rising. You don't have to do that. The rank's backwards, you don't. With respect, ma'am, sit down, Ramirez said, and his voice was rough as gravel. And let me do this the way I need to do it. I've been in this line of work 19 years. 2 wars, more bad nights than I can count. And I am telling you in front of Bob and these men that I have never once in 19 years been closer to dying than I was on that mountain last night. His hand did not waver, but his eyes did. We were done, you understand me. We were finished. Minutes of ammo. A man down and dying. A full ring around us, and no gap, and no plan, and no birds coming. I had already made my peace. I had already thought about my wife and told her goodbye inside my own head. I was ready to die in those rocks. The room was dead silent. And then, Ramirez said, and his voice caught, somebody started shooting from the eastern ridge, and I watched an entire enemy force that outnumbered us 5-1 come apart at the seams, one man at a time. I watched a road open up where there was no road. I heard a voice on the radio tell my commander she'd hold that ridge alone if she had to, and then I watched her do exactly that. You put yourself between us and death, ma'am. You made yourself the target so we could carry Delgado home. You held a wall by yourself for 6 strangers who never gave you the time of day. His hands stayed rock steady in the salute even as the tears ran down that cracked leather face. So no, I do not have to salute you. I get to. And it is the single greatest honor of my 19 years to stand here and do it. And then one by one, without a word, the other 5 operators rose from their chairs and they came to attention and they saluted the woman that every last one of them, had they passed her on the street 3 weeks ago, would have written off without a second thought. Emily stood because there was no possible way to remain seated in the face of that, and she returned their salute, and her right hand shook the whole time, and she let it shake because somewhere on that mountain, she had finally learned that there was no shame at all in a hand that trembled after it had done what hers had done. I didn't do it alone, she said when she trusted her voice. I need every one of you to hear me on that. Every shot I made on that ridge, Sullivan called the wind for it. Every single one. And that last shot, the moving vehicle, 490 meters, I could not have made that in 1,000 years of trying without him reading that valley for me. The wall was 2 people, Gwen. Her voice went fierce and hard. It was always 2. Don't any of you ever tell it any other way. Sullivan stared down at the floor and his jaw worked, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. She's being generous, he said quietly. I've been calling wind for shooters of my entire career. Good ones. Great ones. I have never in my life seen a hand like hers or a mind like hers behind a rifle. She'd have found a way to make every one of those shots without me. He shook his head slowly. But I'll take it, being the man who got to call wind for Emily Carter on the day she did the impossible. I'll carry that to my grave, and I'll be proud of it every day. It was 0847, and by every law of storytelling in war, that should have been the end of it. The mission was over. All 7 men were home. Delgado was in surgery and expected to live. Victor Rahman was dead in a bullet-riddled truck at the bottom of a valley. The doubters had been silenced, the debt to a dead father had been paid, and a broken sniper had become a legend in the span of a single night. The story was finished, except it was not finished. Because at 08:51, a communications specialist knocked on the plywood door, and his face was the color of ash, and he was holding a printout in a hand that would not stay still, and he said the words that turned the whole room to stone. Commander Hayes, sir, it's about the Rahman confirmation. He swallowed hard. There's a problem. Hayes went very still, the way a man goes still when some old instinct warns him the ground is about to open up. What kind of problem, son? We've got the drone footage of the vehicle strike, sir. The truck Captain Carter reported at 490 meters. Vehicles confirmed destroyed, occupants confirmed killed. That part's solid. The specialist's throat worked. But sir, we've been running facial recognition on every body and every piece of footage we pulled off that objective. And the man in the truck, the man Captain Carter shot. He held up the printout and the paper trembled visibly in his grip. It wasn't Victor Rahman, sir. The silence in that plywood room was total. Emily felt the floor tilt sideways under her feet. What, she said, and her voice came out flat and strange. What do you mean it wasn't Rahman? I saw him. Sullivan saw him. Wounded on the far ridge, dragging himself to that truck. We both identified him. Positive ID, both of us. You identified a man who looked exactly like him, ma'am, the specialist said, and he looked physically sick to be saying it. A decoy. Rahman's used body doubles for years. It's the whole reason he stayed breathing for 2 decades when every special operations unit on Earth has been hunting him. The man you wounded on the far ridge and the man in the truck, they were doubles. Both of them. Victor Rahman himself was never on that far ridge at all. He looked up miserable. We believe the real Rahman ran the entire ambush by radio from a hardened fighting position on the reverse slope completely out of your line of sight. And we believe that during the extraction and all the chaos in the withdrawal, he stopped. He made himself finish. We believe he got away, sir. He's alive, and he's still out there. For a long, unbearable moment, not one person in that room could make a sound. Emily sank slowly back down into her chair, and the whole morning came apart in her hands. The 8 hours on the ridge, the impossible shot on the moving truck, the one she had made for her father, the one she had risked her own life and Sullivan's to take when they could have crawled off that mountain clean and safe. All of it. And it had been a decoy, a stand-in, a puppet. And the real Victor Rahman, the actual architect of the whole nightmare, was alive and free, and somewhere in those mountains right now, and he would build another trap next month for somebody else's sons exactly the way she had feared he would. I let him go, she whispered. Sullivan. We could have walked off that ridge alive, and instead, I made us both stay so I could take a shot at a man who wasn't even there. I let the real one slip right through my hands. You did not let anybody do anything, Sullivan said sharp and hard. Stop it. Right now, you made every single call correctly with the information you had in front of you. We both got positive ID off a man Fayed Rahman built specifically to fool people exactly like us. Any shooter on this earth takes that shot, every last one of them. This is not on you, Emily. But Emily was not listening anymore. She had gone somewhere else. She was staring at the tactical map on the wall at that ugly fold of mountains where the whole thing had unfolded, and something was turning slow and cold. In the back of her mind, some instinct her father had buried in her a lifetime ago, and it would not let her sit still. A hardened position on the reverse slope, she said slowly. Say that part again. Exactly where do you think Rahman was running the ambush from? The specialist crossed to the map and put his finger on it. Here, ma'am, best analysis. There's an old fighting position dug into the reverse slope right here, completely masked from any line of sight out of the valley. A man could sit in there and run the whole engagement by radio and never expose so much as a fingernail to your ridge. Emily rose from her chair and walked to the map and stood in front of it, and she stared at that single point until it seemed to burn. And Hayes watched her do it, and something moved in his own chest because he had seen exactly that look on another Carter's face a long, long time ago. It was the look of a mind that has caught the edge of something nobody else in the room has seen yet. Commander, Emily said quietly, not turning around. When we were up on the eastern ridge, right at the very end, after I took the truck, Sullivan, you swept the far ridge one last time before we came off the mountain. Standard procedure. Do you remember that? Yeah, Sullivan said slowly, sitting up. Yeah, I did. Made sure nobody was trying to set up on us before we exposed ourselves coming down. Did you see anything on the reverse slope? Anything at all, Sullivan? Think. Go back there and think. Sullivan frowned, dragging himself back through the bone-deep exhaustion and the fading adrenaline of that final hour on the mountain. And then his eyes went wide and the color drained right out of his face. There was a glint, he said, way back on the reverse slope, above and behind where the truck stopped. A flash of light. I clocked it and I told myself it was scrap metal, a piece of some old wrecked vehicle catching the sun. His voice dropped. I didn't call it out. Our guys were already at the LZ. The fight was over. We were coming off the mountain. Emily, oh my God, you think that glint was him? You think I was looking straight at Victor Rahman and I called it scrap metal? I think, Emily said, turning around slowly, that a man who builds a trap inside a trap is a man who needs to watch it work. I think that's what a man like that lives for. I think Victor Rahman sat on that reverse slope with a pair of binoculars and watched me kill at his doubles one after another, and he told himself he'd beaten the Americans again. I think that glint was the sun off his optics while he savored it. She turned to Hayes and her eyes were burning now, burning the exact way they had burned in a hospital room 6 months ago when a doctor told her she was finished. And I think he's still up there right now, Commander, because a man that arrogant does not run the second the trap springs. He can't. His ego won't let him. He waits. He watches the birds leave. He tells himself he won. And then only then, when he's had his fill of it, he crawls out. Hayes stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the specialist and his voice had gone flat and dangerous. How old is that Overwatch footage? Is there still an asset on station over that valley right now? The specialist's eyes went wide. Yes, sir. Yes. We kept an ISR bird up over the valley to monitor for enemy movement during the withdrawal. It's still on station this minute. Then get me eyes on that reverse slope, Hayes said, and his voice cracked across the room like a rifle shot. That exact fighting position Carter's pointing at. Thermal. Right now. Go. It was 0903, and the entire room held its breath while the specialist sprinted out the door and the seconds stretched into something almost unbearable. And 4 minutes later, he came back through that door at a dead run and threw a fresh printout down onto the table. And one look at it turned every man in the room to stone. It was a thermal image of the reverse slope. And in the mouth of that old fighting position, exactly where Emily's finger had landed on the map, there were 3 heat signatures. 3 men. And one of them was sitting. Not hiding, not fleeing, sitting, unhurried, comfortable. A man who believed with absolute certainty that the fight was over and that he had won it. That's him, Hayes breathed. That's Rahman. Carter, he's still on the mountain. You found him. A dozen analysts and a facial recognition system missed it, and you found him from a plywood room with a map. And then Commander Daniel Hayes did something that stunned every man in that room. He turned slowly and he looked directly at Emily Carter. The QRF birds are still spinning down on the pad, he said. The weather window's open, but it's closing again inside of 90 minutes. If we're going to hit that position before he decides he's savored enough and crawls off that mountain for good, we go now, and we go light, and we go fast. He held her gaze without blinking. Captain Carter, you just fought for 8 hours straight. You just got told the shot you nearly died to make was fired at a puppet. There is not a soul in this room, not me, not one of these men, who would think a single thing less of you if you sat down right now and let a fresh element take this one. You've done more today than most shooters do in a career. He paused. The whole room was watching her. But you're the one who found him, Hayes went on quieter now. You saw the thing that a dozen trained analysts looked straight past. And I'll be honest with you, Captain, in front of these men. There is not another rifle on this base I would rather have on that ridge when we finally corner the real Victor Rahman. So I'm not ordering you. I'm asking, will you get back on that helicopter and go up that mountain one more time and finish this thing for good? Every face in the room turned toward Emily Carter. And Emily, 26 years old, exhausted. Past the point of exhaustion, her hands still trembling. The daughter of a legend looked down at the thermal image of the man who had promised the whole world that no woman would ever stop him. The man whose arrogance had just handed her a second chance she had no right to expect. And she felt something rise up in her chest that was older than the fear and deeper than the exhaustion. And she heard her father's voice as clear as if he were standing in that plywood room with his hand on her shoulder. Stop crying about the shot you missed, Em, and get ready for the shot you're about to make. I missed him once today, Commander, Emily said quietly. She reached down and lifted her rifle from where it leaned against the wall, and she felt its familiar weight settle into her hands like a promise. I'm not going to miss him twice. Sullivan was already on his feet checking his gear. Then you're not going without your spotter, he said. The wall goes back up. Both of us. That's not up for discussion. Both of us, she said, and she was already moving for the door. But it was Ramirez who stopped them at the threshold. He and his 5 men had risen from their chairs, and they were checking magazines and tightening slings, and their exhausted, blood-streaked faces were set with a grim and quiet resolve that no one in that room could have talked them out of. You're not going without us either, ma'am, Ramirez said flatly. Don't even ask. You went up that mountain for 7 strangers who never gave you a chance in the world. You held a wall alone so my brothers could carry Delgado home to his little girls. There is not one man standing in this room who is going to sit on this base drinking coffee while you climb back up there to finish the job. He racked the bolt on his rifle, and the sound was loud in the small room. You covered us. Now we cover you. That's the whole deal, ma'am. That's how it's always worked, and that's how it works today. Emily looked at the 6 men who 8 hours ago had been complete strangers, who a lifetime ago in a different briefing room would have dismissed her with a glance, and who now stood ready to walk straight back into hell at her side without a second's hesitation. And her throat closed too tight for words, so she just nodded once and Ramirez nodded back, and nothing else needed saying. It was 09:11 when the helicopters lifted off the tarmac for the second time that morning. And this time Emily Carter was not the doubted one, the questioned one, the woman they refused to believe in. This time she was the one they followed up the mountain. The commander had asked her, not ordered her. 6 hardened operators had volunteered to guard her back. And as the bird clawed its way up into the thinning air toward a reverse slope where the real Victor Rahman sat believing he had won, Sullivan leaned in close and shouted over the pounding rotors. You know what this is, right? He said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. This is your father's story, Kandahar. He made the impossible shot, and everybody thought the fight was over, and then he found out it wasn't finished, and he climbed right back into it and finished the job anyway. That's what he did, Emily. That's the story of the man. He gripped her shoulder hard. You're not just carrying his name up this mountain anymore. You're living his whole life over again. Right here, today, this hour. Emily looked out the open door at the mountains rushing past below at the brutal fold of rock, where a warlord sat savoring a victory he had not actually won, and she felt the weight of her father's name settle across her shoulders one more time. And for the first time in her entire life, it did not feel like a stone she was doomed to carry. It felt like a pair of wings. "Then let's give it the ending he'd have wanted," she said. The insert was harder the second time. The weather window was closing fast, and the wind up on the high ridge had picked up teeth, and Sullivan cursed steadily under his breath as they low-crawled the last stretch to a firing position on a spur of bare rock that looked down onto the reverse slope from 800 meters out. 800, nearly twice the distance of the shot that had killed the decoy. Because there was nowhere closer that Rahman's remaining men would not spot them coming, and one glimpse, one shout, and the most wanted man in the valley would vanish into the rocks forever. 800 meters, in a wind that was building by the minute, on the most hunted man in the country. "Talk to me, Sullivan," Emily said, settling in behind the rifle, feeling the cold rock through her chest. "Tell me what this wind is doing." "Nothing good," Sullivan muttered, glassing the flags of dust and grass on the slopes below. "It's building fast. You've got left to right at the muzzle, but it's gusting, now won't hold a value 8, 10, 12 miles an hour and back again. And down on that reverse slope where he's sitting, it's worse than the valley was this morning. It's coming off two separate ridge lines and slamming together right on top of him." He lowered the spotting scope and looked at her, and his face was grim as a headstone. "Emily, I have to be straight with you. This is not the same shot as this morning. This is worse. A lot worse. 800 meters of gusting wind that will not settle for even a second, and a target who is going to bolt into that fighting position the instant the first round cracks past him if you don't put him down clean." He held her eyes. "You get one. You understand me? One shot, one breath, everything rides on a single round at 800 meters. In the ugliest wind we've seen all day. There's no second shot up here. He's a ghost the moment you miss." Emily looked through her scope at the small, distant figure of the man sitting in the mouth of that fighting position. The man who had murdered aid workers and slaughtered 2 special forces teams and butchered civilians for his cameras. The man who had built a trap so cunning it had fooled a dozen trained analysts and one very good sniper. The man who was sitting up there right now, at ease, unhurried, absolutely and completely certain that he had won. "He thinks it's over," Emily said softly. "Look at him. He thinks he beat all of us. He's sitting up there feeling like the smartest man on the whole mountain." "He is a smart man," Sullivan said quietly. "That's exactly what makes him so dangerous. He outthought every one of us this morning, Emily, analysts included." "No," Emily said, and her damaged right hand came to rest on the rifle, and it trembled, faint as a candle flame in a draft, and she began slow and deliberate the way her father had taught her to breathe it still. "He outthought us this morning because he stayed to watch, because his arrogance would not let him leave. A smarter man, a humbler man, would have run the instant the trap sprang and been 40 miles gone by now. But not him. He had to sit up there and savor it. He had to watch me kill his doubles one by one so he could feel like a genius." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "The exact same thing that makes him smart is the thing that's about to kill him." He couldn't help himself. He had to stay and watch, and now he's 800 meters away, sitting perfectly still, drinking in a victory he never actually won. And he has no earthly idea that the woman he thinks he beat is looking straight down her scope at his chest. It was 0938. The weather window had maybe 12 minutes left in it. Below the spur, Ramirez and his 5 men were already in position, coiled and ready to sweep the fighting position the instant the shot rang out and take whatever survived. And on that spur of freezing rock, 800 meters from the most wanted man in the valley, Emily Carter breathed her trembling hand down to perfect stillness and slid into the cold, clear, silent place her father had built inside her a lifetime ago in a canyon back home, with his big warm hand resting on her small shoulder. "Give me the wind," she said. "All of it, every seam, and then go quiet and let me work Sullivan. This last one is just between me and him." And Jake Sullivan read the mountain one final time, the building gusts and the hidden seams and the 2 colliding currents pouring off 2 ridge lines, and he called it clean and fast and certain the finest read of his entire career. And then he did exactly what she had asked of him. He went quiet, and he let her work. Emily Carter waited for the edge of an exhale. She waited for a lull in the gusting wind, a single half-second window in all that chaos, where the two colliding currents balanced each other out and the air went still, and she read that window, coming the way she had read 1,000 of them, as a little girl in a canyon with her father teaching her the secret language of the wind. And she waited for the still pause between two heartbeats, the tiny silent doorway, where even a damaged hand goes quiet and true. And in that silence, 800 meters away on a reverse slope, where the worst wind of the day slammed together off two ridges, Victor Rahman slowly turned his face up toward the high ridge. As if some animal instinct, 20 blood-soaked years in the making, had finally 1 full second too late, whispered into his ear that he was not alone on this mountain after all. And Emily Carter, the woman a hospital had tried to bury the woman, 24 elite operators had written off without a thought, the daughter of the man who saved 11 lives at Kandahar, and then spent the last breath of his life making one more impossible shot on a mountain. Exactly like this one looked Victor Rahman dead in the eye through 800 meters of screaming wind and let out her breath slow and even, and kept the promise she had made to her father on the worst night of her life. She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder at 0939, and the round left the barrel at 800 meters and rode a wind that no other shooter on that base could have read through the seam between two colliding currents into the exact half-second of stillness that Emily Carter had waited her whole life to find. And this time, there was no decoy. Sullivan was locked on the glass and he saw it land, and for one long second, he could not make his voice work at all. Then he breathed out a single word. Down. Emily did not move off the rifle. Confirm it, she said quietly. Sullivan, I am not coming off this mountain again on a maybe. Confirm it's him. He's down and he's not moving, Sullivan said, his eye pressed to the scope, his voice climbing. The two beside him are running. They're breaking for the rocks. But he's down, Emily's center mass at 800 meters in that wind. He dropped where he sat. He keyed his radio with a shaking hand. Ramirez target is down, move on the position. Confirm the ID, go, go, go. And below them, Ramirez and his 5 men rose up out of the rocks and swept down onto that fighting position like the wrath of God, and Emily held her scope steady on the 2 fleeing fighters ready, but Sullivan put his hand flat on her shoulder. Let them run, he said softly. It's not the doubles that matter. It's him. Let Ramirez confirm him. So she waited, and the seconds stretched out into something unbearable, the same unbearable stretch as the plywood room, because she had believed once already this morning that it was over, and she did not think she could survive believing it a second time and being wrong. Then Ramirez's voice came over the radio, and it was not flat, and it was not tactical. It was cracked wide open. Overwatch, this is Ramirez. A pause and a ragged breath. I'm standing over the body. Facial recognition on the handheld. It's a match, ma'am. His voice broke completely. It's him. It's the real one. It's Victor Rahman. It's confirmed. He's dead. You got him. You actually got him. For a long moment, Emily Carter did not move at all. She lay on that spur of freezing rock with the rifle still warm against her shoulder and her damaged hand finally fully allowed to shake, and she stared through her scope at the still figure 800 meters away, and something broke loose inside her chest that she had been holding down since a hospital bed 6 months ago, since a canyon a lifetime ago, since the worst night of her life when she had made a promise to a dying man over a phone line and been certain, absolutely certain, that she would never be able to keep it. I got him, Dad, she whispered so quietly that even Sullivan 6 inches away did not hear it. I got him. I kept the promise. All of it. Every word. And then finally she let the rifle come down. It was 0941, and on that mountain the fight that had begun at 3 o'clock in the morning was over at last for real this time, all the way down to the bone. Sullivan sat back on his heels and looked at her, and his face was wet, and he did not bother to hide it. 800 meters, he said, shaking his head slowly. A gusting wind off 2 ridgelines. 1 shot, 1 breath, no second chance. Emily, I have been doing this my whole career, and I did not believe that shot was possible. I called the wind for it, and I still did not believe it could be done. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and you did it like you were putting a key in a lock. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't natural, Emily said quietly, and her voice was thick. My father made me shoot that exact shot 10,000 times in a canyon back home. Moving targets, colliding winds, 1 breath, 1 round. I hated him for it, Sullivan. I was a kid, and my friends were at the lake, and my father had me lying in the dirt reading wind off two ridges until my eyes burned. She let out a shaking breath, and the whole time he'd say, "Someday, you're going to need this, Em," and I never believed him. Not once. I thought he was just a hard old man who didn't know how to love his daughter anyway except through a rifle. She looked at the still figure on the far slope. I was wrong. He was teaching me for this, for today, for a mountain he'd never lived to see. He gave me the shot that finished the man he spent his whole life fighting, and he did it years before either of us knew Victor Rahman's name. Sullivan was quiet for a moment. Then he said gently, "He knew you'd be great. That's why he was hard on you. He wasn't teaching you to shoot Emily. He was teaching you to be ready for the day the world put 7 lives on your shoulders. And you were. When it came, you were ready." He put his hand on her shoulder. "That's not a hard old man who didn't know how to love his daughter. That's a father who loved her so much he spent every spare hour making sure that when the impossible day came, she'd walk off the mountain alive." And she did. Emily could not answer. She just reached up and gripped his hand on her shoulder hard, and the two of them sat there on that spur of rock in the thin morning air while the sun climbed over the mountains, and neither of them said another word because none were needed. It was 0946 when the helicopters came for them, and this time as they lifted off that mountain, for the last time Emily Carter looked down at the fighting position, where Ramirez and his men stood guard over the body of Victor Rahman, and she felt the weight she had carried up that mountain. Her father's weight lift off her shoulders and float away into the clear morning sky. She had not set it down. She had earned the right to let it go. The story should have ended there. It did not. Because when they landed back at the forward base for the second time, there was a surgeon waiting on the tarmac, and Emily's heart seized in her chest at the sight of him, because a surgeon coming out to meet the birds is almost never good news, and she had one man on this earth she could not bear to lose after everything. "Delgado," she said before her feet even hit the ground. "The surgeon, Sullivan, it's about Delgado." She ran. She was exhausted past exhaustion. She had been fighting for over 8 hours, and she ran across that tarmac like her own life depended on it, and she reached the surgeon and grabbed his arm. "Delgado," she gasped, "tell me, please, just tell me." The surgeon looked at her, and for one horrible second his face was unreadable, and then it broke into a tired, worn smile. "You're Carter," he said, "the sniper. He hasn't stopped saying your name since he came out of anesthesia." He put his hand over hers. "He's going to make it, Captain. It was close. Closest I've seen in a long time. The round nicked an artery and he lost more blood than a man's supposed to be able to lose and still be here. But he's stable. He's awake. And he's going home to those 3 little girls." Emily's knees buckled. Sullivan caught her, and this time she did not pretend she wasn't coming apart. She stood there on the tarmac, and she wept openly with relief, because all 7 of them had made it, every single one, exactly the way she had sworn they would in a briefing room a lifetime and 8 hours ago. "Can I see him?" she managed. "He'd never forgive me if I said no," the surgeon said. They led her into the recovery ward, and Delgado was propped up on pillows, pale and hollow-eyed, and wrapped in bandages, and when he saw her in the doorway, his whole ravaged face lit up like sunrise. "There she is," Delgado whispered, "the woman who wouldn't let me die." Emily crossed the room and took his hand, and she could not speak. "I called my wife," Delgado said, his voice weak but steady. "Soon as I could hold a phone. First thing I told her wasn't that I was hurt. First thing I told her was your name. Emily Carter. I said, remember that name because our girls are going to grow up knowing it." His eyes filled. "My oldest, she's 7. She asked her mama why she should remember a lady she never met. And you know what my wife told her?" He gripped Emily's hand. "She said because that lady is the reason you still have a daddy." Emily bowed her head over his hand and let the tears come. And Delgado reached up with his free hand and rested it gently on the top of her head, the way a father might, the way her own father used to. And neither of them said anything for a long, long time. It was 11:12, and in that quiet recovery ward, Emily Carter finally understood all the way down that this was the whole thing. Not the 25, not Rahman, not the impossible shots, or the salutes, or the name she carried. Just this. One man alive, one family whole. 3 little girls in Ohio who would grow up with their father because a broken woman refused to accept that her story was over. The debrief on the second mission was short, and the report on Rahman went up the chain, And within a week, the whole story had traveled farther than Emily Carter ever imagined it could. They wanted to give her medals. She let them because her father had taught her that you accept honors gracefully, not for yourself, but for the men who fought beside you and the ones who did not come home. They stood her up in front of cameras and generals, and they pinned things to her chest, and they called her a hero. And through all of it, Emily kept her jaw set and her eyes forward and thought about a man in the dust with a grin and 3 faded words on the back of a photograph. Never quit, brother. But the moment that mattered most did not happen in front of any cameras. It happened 3 weeks later in Commander Hayes's cramped office on the coast, with the ocean roaring behind the barracks, the way it had on the morning she first stepped off that bus, a woman everyone doubted. Hayes slid a folder across the desk to her. "Read it," he said. Emily opened it. It was an official recommendation. Her name was at the top, and below it were the words she had never in her life expected to see it attached to her own name. A recommendation that Captain Emily Carter be appointed lead instructor of the Integrated Sniper Program. The very program she had walked into on a busted hand with 24 men certain she would wash out in a week. "You want me to teach," she said slowly. "I want you to build the next ones," Hayes said. "I've been doing this 22 years, Emily. I've trained a lot of shooters. Some of them were gifted. A few of them were great. But I have never in my life met one who could do what you did on that ridge. And I don't mean the shooting, though. God knows the shooting was something I'll tell my grandchildren about." He leaned forward. "I mean the part where you faced a valley with your back wide open and trusted a man who tried to break you to cover it. The part where you traded your own life for 7 strangers who never gave you a chance. The part where you saw a warlord that a dozen analysts missed and got back on a helicopter after 8 hours of hell to go finish him." He shook his head. "I can teach a man to read wind, Emily. I cannot teach him that. But you can, because you didn't learn it in a school. You learned it in a hospital bed when they told you it was over, and you got up anyway." Emily stared down at the folder for a long moment. "There's going to be another woman someday," she said quietly. "Or another man, somebody the world's already written off, somebody with a busted hand, or a busted record, or a busted something walking off a bus into a formation full of people who've already decided they'll never make it." She looked up, "And they're going to need somebody standing there who knows exactly what that feels like. Somebody who can look them in the eye and say, 'I know they told you it's over. It's not over. Now pick up your rifle.'" "Yes," Hayes said, "they are. And I can't think of a soul on this earth better suited to be that somebody than you." Emily closed the folder. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition. Name it. Sullivan's my senior instructor. Nobody reads wind like him, and nobody's earned the right more. We were the wall commander. If I'm going to build the next ones, I build them with him." Hayes smiled, the first full smile she had seen on that weathered face in all the time she'd known him. "He already said yes," Hayes said, "before I even asked you. Said if you were building something, he wasn't going to be anywhere else." He stood and put out his hand. "Welcome aboard, Instructor Carter." And Emily Carter shook the hand of the man who had pulled her out of a hospital on a debt to her dead father. The man she now knew was one of the 11 her father had saved at Kandahar, the man who had reached across 30 years and 2 wars to give a broken woman the chance to become what she was always meant to be. And she thought, standing there, that the circle her father had drawn was still closing wider and wider, generation after generation. Marcus Carter had saved 11 men. One of them had believed in his daughter. His daughter had saved 7 more. And now she would build the shooters who would save the ones after that, and the ones after them, on and on, down the years, long after anyone remembered her name. That she understood at last was what a legacy actually was. Not the number of targets you eliminated, not the impossible shots or the medals or the salutes. A legacy was the people you made possible, the ones who lived because you didn't quit, the ones you taught to not quit either. Years later, Emily Carter was still teaching on that same windswept coast when a young recruit washed into her program the way she once had. A young woman, this one with a stutter that made the other candidates smirk, and a service record that had been quietly working against her from the start, walking off a bus into a formation full of people who had already decided she would never last a week. Emily watched her from the edge of the grinder, and she saw the girl's shoulders squared against the dismissal she could already feel pressing in from every side. And she saw the girl's jaw set hard against the doubt. And Emily Carter walked out across that grinder, past 24 skeptical candidates, and stopped in front of the young woman and looked her dead in the eye. "What's your name?" Emily said. "See, Carter, ma'am. No relation." The girl flushed. "Rivera, Sophia Rivera." "Rivera." Emily nodded slowly. "You know what they're all thinking right now. Every one of them. They've already decided your story. Busted record, the stutter, the whole thing. They think you'll be gone inside a week." The girl's chin came up, but her eyes were scared. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," Emily said. "Hold on to that, because I'm going to tell you something nobody told me until it was almost too late." She leaned in close so only the girl could hear. "The rifle doesn't care what they think. It doesn't care about your record or your voice or a single thing about you except one. It only cares what you do next. You can't control the doubt, Rivera. You can't control the wind. You can only control the next breath and the next round." She straightened. "So stop worrying about what they've decided and get ready for the shot you're about to make." And the young woman looked at Emily Carter, the legend, the instructor, whose name she had heard whispered with awe since the day she enlisted, and something changed in her face. The fear was still there, but underneath it now was something harder and cleaner and unbreakable. "Yes, ma'am," Sophia Rivera said, and her voice did not stutter. Emily Carter watched her walk into the barracks to make her bunk, and she felt her father standing beside her the way she always did in the moments that mattered, his big warm hand on her shoulder, his grin in the wind off the ocean. "Look at that, Em," she heard him say. "You're not just carrying the name anymore, you're giving it away. That's the only way it ever lives forever." Emily Carter smiled and looked out at the roaring ocean and knew all the way to the bottom of her heart that she had become exactly what her father always believed she would be. She had entered that battlefield carrying the weight of 7 lives. She left carrying something far greater, a legacy that would outlive her name, passed from a father to a daughter, from a daughter to a stranger, from a stranger to the ones who came after, on and on forever, every time someone the world had written off picked up a rifle and refused to quit. They told Emily Carter her story was over in a hospital bed when she was 26 years old. They were wrong. Her story will never be over.